Jackson Miller pointed directly at her and laughed out loud. Seriously? He turned to the whole room, arms wide open, making sure everyone heard him. Command sent her. That's the big secret weapon they've been hyping for 3 weeks. The laughter spread benties. Nobody stopped it. Nobody even tried. And the woman sitting alone in the corner, the one they were all laughing at, didn't move a single muscle. She just kept her eyes on the map in front of her, like the noise in that room had absolutely nothing to do with her. That silence, it should have been the first warning. Nobody caught it. If this story moves you, hit subscribe and drop your city in the comments. I want to see exactly how far Iron Wolf has traveled. The cold at Raven Peak Training Facility was the kind that didn't just touch your skin. It went through your bones, found the parts of you that thought they were strong, and squeezed until you weren't so sure anymore. It was the kind of cold that made young men quiet. The kind that reminded you no matter how much training you'd been through, no matter how many push-ups you could knock out, or how many miles you could run before sunrise, the mountain didn't care about any of that. The mountain didn't care about your scores, your rankings, your reputation. The mountain just waited, and Raven Peak had been waiting for a long time. The 6 Navy SEAL candidates who arrived that Tuesday morning had already heard the warnings about the altitude and the temperature and the isolation. They'd been briefed on the training rotation, the objectives, the timeline. They knew the facility was remote. They knew the communication infrastructure was limited. They knew the terrain was unforgiving and that the exercises planned for the next 3 weeks would push them harder than anything they'd experienced in formal training. What they didn't know, what nobody had bothered to tell them, was who they were going to meet when they got there. Maybe Command thought they'd figure it out on their own. Maybe someone higher up the chain decided that a surprise would be more instructive than an introduction. Either way, when the 6 candidates stepped through the steel door of the main operations building and shook the ice off their gear and started looking around for whoever was supposed to be running this rotation, they found a room that looked completely ordinary. A long table covered in topographic maps. A wall of communications equipment, half of it older than most of them. Folding chairs arranged in no particular order. A coffee machine in the corner that sounded like it was having a private argument with itself. 2 junior staff members moving around with clipboards not looking up. And 1 woman sitting alone at the far end of the table. She wasn't in uniform exactly. She had on cold weather gear, practical worn, the kind of equipment that had clearly seen real use rather than display case storage. Her dark hair was pulled back tight. No jewelry, no insignia visible from where they stood. On the table in front of her was a topographic map of the surrounding mountain range, a mug of something hot, and a rifle case that looked older than the facility itself. She was reading the map with the kind of focus you give something when the information on it actually matters, not studying, reading. Like every line on that paper meant something specific to her, and she was having a quiet conversation with the terrain. She did not look up when they came in. She did not acknowledge them at all. Jackson Miller noticed her first. He was 24 years old, 6'1", had graduated near the top of his SEAL qualification class, and carried himself with the particular confidence of someone who had been the best in every room he'd ever walked into until about 6 months ago, when he entered serious training and discovered uncomfortably that there were rooms full of people just as good as him. He was still adjusting to that, still working on it, still carrying a little more edge than was probably useful. He looked at the woman at the far end of the table. Then he looked at his teammate Reyes, who was standing next to him. Reyes raised his eyebrows. Jackson kept his voice low, or thought he did. The room was small enough that low didn't really mean private. "Who's that?" One of the junior staff members with a clipboard glanced up just long enough to answer. "Captain Cross. She's running this rotation." The silence that followed lasted maybe 2 seconds. Then Jackson Miller laughed. It wasn't a small laugh. It wasn't a polite, under his breath, easily ignored laugh. It was the kind of laugh that fills a room, the kind that invites other people to join in before they have even decided if they think something is funny. Reyes caught it immediately. Martinez, who was standing near the door, turned around to see what was happening. Okafor pulled off his gloves and grinned. Brennan, the quietest of the 6, pressed his lips together in a way that wasn't quite a smile but wasn't not one either. Only Torres didn't laugh. Torres was watching the woman at the far end of the table. Seriously. Jackson's voice was carrying now, and he either didn't notice or didn't care. He turned slightly toward the group, arms opening up just a little, the unconscious gesture of someone working an audience. Command sent her, that's who they've been building up for 3 weeks. We get up here after everything they told us about this rotation, and this is the big Miller. The voice came from a doorway on the left side of the room that none of them had been watching. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It had the particular quality of a voice that had spent a long time expecting to be heard the first time. Commander Nathan Cole stepped into the room. He was in his late 40s, and he wore it the way certain men do not like age had arrived and started taking things away. But like it had arrived and started adding weight, the kind of weight that made people stand differently when he walked into a room. He had a jaw that looked like it had been carved from the same granite as the mountain outside, and eyes that were the particular pale gray of Alaska sky in January. Not cold exactly, but containing within them the memory of every cold thing they had ever witnessed. He was carrying a folder. He set it on the table without it opening it. He looked at Jackson Miller for exactly long enough to make the younger man's shoulders come down about an inch. "Something you want to say?" Cole asked. Jackson straightened. "No, sir. Because you seemed pretty entertained by something." "I was just—" Jackson glanced toward the woman at the far end of the table. She still hadn't looked up. "I wasn't expecting— Command didn't give us much information about who was running this, and I was just—" "You were judging," Cole said. The word landed flat, not accusatory, just accurate. Jackson didn't answer. "You walked through that door," Cole continued, "looked at a person you've never met in your life, and made a decision about her in about 4 seconds. He paused. "That sound right?" "Sir, I'm not asking you to defend it. I'm asking you if that's what happened." "A beat." "Yes, sir." Cole nodded slowly. He picked up his folder. He looked around the room at all 6 of them, taking his time the way a man does when he wants to make sure something gets heard properly. "Careful what you laugh at," he said. He said it quietly. He said it the way you'd say something you'd learned the hard way and didn't particularly enjoy remembering. "That woman you just made your first judgment about." He didn't point. He didn't need to. "She is the reason that men with more experience than all of you put together are still walking around breathing today. She is the reason that 3 operations that nobody in this room is cleared to know about ended with survivors instead of body bags." He paused. "She is the reason I personally got to go home to my family after something happened on a mountain 7 years ago that I don't talk about at dinner." The room was completely still. The coffee machine in the corner had even stopped its argument. "I know what you thought when you saw her," Cole said. "I know because I was 23 years old once, and I thought the same kind of things about people I'd never met and didn't understand. The difference between you and me at 23 is that you've still got a chance to learn before it costs you something that can't be given back." Jackson was looking at his boots. "Eyes up," Cole said. "Not unkind, just clear." Jackson looked up. "You want to survive the next 3 weeks?" Cole asked. "You want to be better when you leave this mountain than you were when you arrived. Then you pay attention to everything she says. You ask good questions. You watch how she thinks." He closed his folder. "And you leave whatever you walked in here with at that door because it is not going to serve you up here." He walked to the far side of the room and took a seat. And for the first time since they had arrived, the woman at the end of the table looked up from her map. Captain Elena Cross looked at each of them in turn. Not for long, not making a show of it. Just a brief, clear, complete assessment, the kind of look that made you feel like someone had quietly opened a filing cabinet inside your chest and was reading the contents without any particular judgment. She didn't smile. She didn't perform. She said, "There's coffee. Drink it while it's hot. We start in 10 minutes. And she went back to her map. It took exactly 10 minutes to learn that Captain Elena Cross ran a meeting the way certain surgeons run an operating room. Nothing wasted, nothing repeated. Every word placed with deliberate precision in exactly the position where it would do the most work. She stood at the head of the table and talked through the training rotation without a single unnecessary sentence. Mission parameters, terrain challenges, communication protocols, environmental risk assessment. She drew on the topographic map with a precision that suggested she'd memorized the landscape rather than simply studied it. Jackson watched her hands when she pointed to specific coordinates on the map. Steady, not even a trace of the microtremor that comes from cold or nerves, or the awareness of being watched by people who are looking for reasons to dismiss you. She was completely without performance. That was the thing that Jackson couldn't quite get comfortable with. Every instructor he'd had until this point had known they were being watched and had conducted themselves accordingly. There was always some element of display, some awareness of the audience, some calibration of presence and voice for the benefit of the room. Even the best ones did it. Even Cole did it in his way. Elena Cross did not. She talked about the mountain the way you'd talk about a problem you'd been studying for years. With focus, with respect, with the particular attention of someone who understood that the subject had the capacity to hurt them and was choosing to engage with it anyway. Question, Jackson said when she paused. She looked at him. Go ahead. The Eastern approach, you've marked it as primary extraction route, but the elevation change there is significant enough that in heavy weather it's compromised, she said. Yes, that's why we have 3 alternates. She tapped the map. This one becomes primary if visibility drops below 30 meters. This one if temperature falls faster than forecast. This one, and her finger moved, is for situations where we don't have time to discuss options. Jackson nodded. Another question, she asked. He hesitated. How do you know which one you're in? She looked at him for a moment. Something shifted slightly in her expression. Not warmth exactly, but the recognition of a question that was better than the ones that usually got asked. You feel it, she said. And before you tell me that's not a useful answer, understand that the feeling comes from experience, and the experience comes from paying attention, and the paying attention starts right now. She moved on. Martinez communication protocols. Tell me what you noticed about the setup when you came in. Martinez caught off guard, straightened in his chair. The equipment looks outdated. Some of it is. What else? The satellite uplink looks newer. Civilian grade maybe. Military grade civilian design. Common in remote facilities. Why bad? Martinez thought about it. Less visible on surveillance and less dependent on military satellite windows. Good. She moved to the next person. Okafor. She went around the room, not testing, establishing, finding out what they knew and what they didn't without making the people who didn't know things feel small about it. Just mapping the territory of 6 people's knowledge and experience the same way she'd mapped the physical territory on the table in front of them. Jackson found himself leaning forward without realizing he'd done it. It was Reyes who started it again at lunch. They were in the small mess area off the main building, 6 of them, and a cook named Harris, who was either genuinely unaware of the tension in the room or had perfected the ability to be invisible in exactly the right moments. Jackson suspected the latter. Reyes was a good operator, fast, technically excellent, carrying his own ego around in a way that he'd learned to disguise as confidence. He was quieter than Jackson about most things, which meant when he spoke, people paid attention, and he knew it. I'm not saying she isn't competent, Reyes said. He said it with his fork halfway to his mouth, which was the kind of casual that was deliberately performed. Then what are you saying? Torres asked. Reyes set his fork down. I'm saying there's a reason command doesn't typically send someone like her to a facility like this for a rotation like this. The profile doesn't match. The profile, Torres repeated. Solo operator background, classified history, no current unit assignment as far as I can find. Reyes shrugged. That's not a decorated field commander. That's someone they send in when they need something done quietly in a way that doesn't get recorded. That's called a special operations specialist, Torres said. I know what it's called. Then what's your actual point? Reyes paused. My point is that teaching isn't the same as doing. And 3 weeks is a long time to spend on someone who might be here because the classified work dried up and they needed somewhere to put her. The table was quiet. Jackson had been listening without contributing. He was aware in a way he wasn't always aware of the exact nature of the conversation he was sitting in. He'd been the one who laughed in the operations room. He'd been the one Cole had looked at when he said, "Careful what you laugh at." The taste of that moment was still sitting at the back of his throat in a way he didn't love. But Reyes wasn't wrong that the profile was unusual. She knew the terrain better than the maps, Jackson said. Everyone looked at him. In the briefing, she was correcting the topographic data, pointing out places where the maps were outdated. She knew the ridgeline changes the new erosion patterns, a specific drainage shift on the north face. He paused. That's not textbook knowledge. That comes from being up there. So she's been to the mountain before, Reyes said. Recently, in conditions similar to what we're looking at this week. Reyes thought about that. Still doesn't tell us who she is. No, Jackson agreed. It doesn't. Across the mess area through the small window that looked into the main corridor, Jackson saw Elena Cross walk past carrying her rifle case. She was moving with a particular unhurried purpose of someone who always knew where they were going and never needed to rush to get there. She didn't look into the mess area. She didn't look anywhere except straight ahead. And despite himself, despite the laughter that morning, and Reyes's reasonable-sounding questions and his own honest uncertainty about all of it, Jackson Miller watched her pass and felt something he wasn't quite comfortable naming. He thought she already knows what's coming. He didn't know why he thought it. He wouldn't understand why until much later. The afternoon session was navigation and terrain assessment. Elena took them out into the cold one at a time and gave each of them a set of coordinates and told them to find the route and explain their reasoning. Jackson went third. He stood at the starting point with his map and compass in the particular awareness of being evaluated that he'd had since he was 17 years old in his first competitive environment and had never entirely lost. He plotted the route, he considered the terrain, he made his choices. When he explained them, Elena listened without expression. Then she said, "Walk me through the third decision point again." He did. She said, "What happens to that route if the temperature drops 8 degrees in the next 2 hours?" He looked at the map. He thought about it. The northern gully could ice up faster than forecast, which means the footing changes on the descent. What do you do? Adjust to the alternate approach, come around from the west side where the grade is less aggressive. She nodded once, the kind of nod that doesn't mean well done, but means correct. There was a difference, and he'd already learned to hear it. "You think well under observation," she said. He wasn't sure if that was a compliment or a diagnosis. "How do you think when nobody's watching?" she asked. He opened his mouth and then closed it because he'd been about to give the answer that sounded right rather than the answer that was true, and something about the directness of her attention made him feel like the difference would be immediately visible. "Honestly," he said, "please. I cut corners. I don't cut in front of instructors. Small ones. Efficiency choices that usually work out, but occasionally don't." "Yes, ma'am." She looked at him for a moment. The wind moved around them. Somewhere higher up the mountain, something snow, maybe, or ice, shifting made a sound like a door closing in a distant room. "That's honest," she said. "Most candidates at your level can't say that." "Is it a problem? Having the self-awareness to recognize it?" She almost smiled. Not quite. No, not having the self-awareness would be the problem. She marked something on her own copy of the map. "The corners you cut, are they always the same ones?" He thought about it seriously. "Mostly. Situation assessment sometimes. I trust my first read more than I should." "Why, right, so?" "Because it's usually right. And when it isn't, it can be, he stopped. "Catastrophic," she said quietly. Not to him, almost to herself, like the word had a specific weight for her that it didn't have for anyone else in their current conversation. She looked back down at her map. "Run it again," she said. "Different starting point, and this time it act like nobody's watching." He did. He ran it differently than he'd run the first one. She watched him the whole time without looking like she was watching. And when he came back, she said simply, "That was better." He didn't know what to do with that. He thought about it for the rest of the afternoon. The evening briefing was when Cole delivered the intelligence report, and the room changed completely. He didn't build to it. He didn't soften it. He set his tablet on the table and read from it the way you read something when you want the words to land exactly as they are without the distortion of delivery. As of 1400 hours today, headquarters has flagged movement patterns approximately 12 kilometers north-northeast of this facility. The nature of the movement is consistent with small team tactical approach. The weather system currently developing to the west is expected to reach the peak by 0300 tomorrow morning, bringing winds in excess of 60 miles per hour and near zero visibility. He looked up. This is no longer a standard training rotation. The silence that fell on the room was different from the silence earlier in the day. Earlier had been the silence of 6 young men recalibrating their expectations. This was the silence of 6 young men understanding suddenly and completely that they were in a situation that had real stakes attached to it. Martinez was the first to speak. "Are we looking at a targeted approach, or is this coincidental proximity?" "We don't have enough information to rule out either," Cole said. "What assets do we have available for extraction?" With the weather system coming in, aircraft is grounded, starting at approximately 2200 hours tonight. That's our window. How many personnel total in the facility? Counting all 6 of you, myself, Captain Cross, 4 support staff, and 2 communications technicians. Cole paused. 14 people. Reyes was doing the math on his face that everyone could see. Against a potential hostile element of unknown size in near-zero visibility on terrain, we've had one afternoon to assess. Yes, Cole said. Reyes looked at Elena. And you knew. The room turned to her. Elena had been sitting at the end of the table since the briefing started. She hadn't moved, hadn't reacted, hadn't shown a single sign of surprise at any of the information Cole was delivering. She looked now exactly as she'd looked that morning when they walked in, completely contained, completely present, and completely unreadable. You already knew about this, Reyes said. It wasn't quite an accusation. It was something between a question and a statement, the kind of thing you say when you've just understood something and aren't entirely sure how you feel about it. Elena looked at him calmly. I had information, yes. Before I arrived. The quiet in the room shifted texture. Jackson could feel it, everyone recalibrating again, but differently this time. Earlier, they'd been recalibrating their opinions of a person. Now they were recalibrating their understanding of a situation. That's why you were here, Jackson said. It came out slower than he intended, like the sentence was assembling itself as he spoke. This wasn't a training rotation. Or it was, but it also wasn't. Elena didn't confirm or deny it directly. She said, the training is real. Everything you did today, the assessment, the navigation, the briefings, all of that matters, and all of that was genuine. But the timing of this rotation, Jackson pressed, being here now with this weather system coming in, and whatever is moving on the North Ridge, was not accidental, she said. The room breathed. So what are we dealing with? Okafor asked. His voice was steady. Good control. Elena looked at Cole, a question without words. He gave her a brief nod. She stood up. She moved to the map on the wall, not the training map from the afternoon, but a larger operational map that Jackson realized now that he was looking properly had been there since they arrived. He'd seen it and processed it as background without examining it. She placed her hand flat on the northeastern section of the mountain range. There is a small communications relay station approximately 14 kilometers from here. It's not on any public record. It's not on any map that's been distributed to standard military channels in the last 4 years. She traced a line with her finger. It runs a very specific kind of traffic, encrypted intermittent, with a signature that is extremely difficult to distinguish from standard atmospheric noise if you don't know exactly what you're looking for. And someone is looking for it, Torres said. Someone found it, Elena said. 3 weeks ago. We've been tracking the response ever since. She turned from the map. The facility you're standing in right now is close enough to that relay station that taking it would give any hostile element effective control of a 40-kilometer communication corridor through this mountain range. And you came here to protect the station, Reyes said. I came here, Elena said, because someone needs to be on this mountain who has done this before. The room was utterly still. Jackson found himself looking at the rifle case on the floor beside her chair. The old one. The one she'd carried in that morning with her small backpack and nothing else while they'd all arrived with full gear and equipment in the particular swagger of candidates who thought they already knew what hard looked like. He thought about what Cole had said. The reason people like you are still alive. He thought about the navigation exercise that afternoon. Act like nobody's watching. He thought about the way she'd looked at the map that morning, not studying, reading, because she already knew what the map was going to say. And something settled in his chest that wasn't quite fear and wasn't quite respect, and was maybe at its most accurate, the specific feeling that arrives when you understand that you have been wrong about something in a way that matters. Captain Cross, he said. She looked at him. What do you need us to do? For the first time since they'd arrived on that mountain, something in her expression shifted in a direction that wasn't closed. It wasn't warmth. It was something more operational than warmth. The particular regard of a person who has just received the information that the people around them are finally ready to work. First, she said, I need you to forget every assumption you carried through that door this morning. Jackson nodded. Second, she looked around at all 6 of them. I need you to understand that what happens in the next 12 hours is going to ask more of you than you think you have. And I need you to believe me when I tell you that you have it." She paused. "Because I've looked at your files and I've watched you for one day and I know what's in there. The question is whether you know." Brennan, the quiet one, said, "And if we don't?" Elena picked up her rifle case. She set it on the table and opened it for the first time since she'd arrived. The rifle inside was older than the facility. It was clean and precise and had the kind of careful maintenance that only exists when someone has genuinely depended on an object for their life on more than one occasion. Every part of it spoke a very specific language about the person who carried it. "Then tonight will teach you," she said. She began to check her equipment with the calm economy of movement of someone who had been in this exact position. Different mountain, different weather, different hostels, but this exact position more times than anyone in that room was cleared to know about. The storm was coming, and somewhere on the north ridge of Raven Peak, something was moving closer. And Captain Elena Cross Ironwolf had not come to this mountain to train 6 candidates. She had come here because she was the only person who had been in this situation before and lived through it, and someone somewhere had made the decision that this mountain needed someone exactly like that. Jackson Miller watched her check her weapon with the same focus she'd given that map that morning. He thought about how he'd laughed. He thought about Cole's voice. Careful what you laugh at. He thought about how the most important things in any room are almost never the loudest ones. He didn't say anything. He picked up his own gear. He started to prepare. Because some lessons don't come from classrooms or briefings or even the quiet wisdom of good instructors. Some lessons can only be delivered by what arrives in the dark when the wind is screaming and the lights go out and you discover finally and completely whether the person you thought you were is the person you actually are. The storm would be at Raven Peak by 0300. It was 2100 now. 6 hours. And somewhere in the heart of those 6 hours, Jackson Miller and everyone else in that room was about to meet themselves in a way they hadn't expected and couldn't prepare for. The rifle case closed with a quiet, precise click. Elena Cross stood up. "Let's get to work." 2104 hours. Jackson had been in cold weather before. He'd trained in Minnesota in February. He'd done a winter exercise in Norway that his commanding officer had described with what Jackson later understood was deliberate understatement as brisk. He thought he knew what cold meant. Raven Peak was explaining to him with quiet patience that he did not. The temperature inside the operations building had dropped 4 degrees in the last hour without anyone opening an exterior door. The heating system was running. It just wasn't winning. He was checking his gear at one of the side tables when Torres appeared next to him. Torres was the one who hadn't laughed that morning. Jackson had noticed that at the time and filed it away without examining it the way you file things away when you're not quite ready to think about what they mean. "You doing it okay?" Torres asked. "Yeah." Jackson tightened a strap on his kit. "Yeah, I'm good." Torres didn't say anything for a moment. He was checking his own equipment with the methodical care that was simply who he was. Torres did everything methodically from tying his boots to reading a situation report, and it was one of the things that made him quietly and without drama one of the best candidates in their group. "You look like you had something on your mind in the briefing," Torres said. "I always have something on my mind." "I did. Different kind of something." Jackson paused, looked at his hands, looked at the equipment spread in front of him. "When she said she came here because someone needed to be on this mountain who had done this before him," he stopped. "Yeah, she's done this exact thing before, not something like this." "This." Torres looked at him steadily. "That's what Cole said. Cole said people like us are alive because of her, which means at some point there were people exactly like us who weren't." Jackson reached for a component of his kit. His hands were steady. He was mildly impressed at that. And she was the reason the number who didn't make it wasn't higher. Torres was quiet for a moment. "Does that scare you?" "It clarifies things." Torres nodded slowly. That was all he said. He went back to his equipment, and Jackson went back to his, and between the two of them in that quiet, something had been acknowledged that didn't need more words than it had already been given. Across the room, Elena was at the communications station, not using it, examining it. She was running her hands along the connections, checking outputs, testing signal strength on different channels. One of the communications technicians, a young woman named Park, was walking her through the system's current status, with the careful efficiency of someone who had been told in no uncertain terms that the person they were briefing needed real information and not a performance of helpfulness. Satellite uplink is intermittent, Park said. It's been cycling on and off for the last 40 minutes. Could be the weather system interfering early or someone's jamming it, Elena said. Park paused. That's the other possibility. What's your read? Park hesitated. She was maybe 25. She had the look of someone who was very good at their technical job and had not yet been in a situation where the technical job had immediate life or death consequences. The signal pattern is more consistent with weather interference. Jamming usually has a different signature. Usually, Elena said. Yes, usually. Elena looked at the readouts for another moment. Switch to the backup landline protocol and start logging every interruption with exact timestamps. I want a record. Yes, ma'am. Elena stepped back from the station. She looked at the room, not sweeping it dramatically, but simply checking the way you check a space when you are responsible for everything inside it. Her eyes moved to Jackson briefly. He was watching her. She didn't look away, and neither did he. She said across the room, Miller, when you're done, they're come with me. He pulled on his jacket and followed her out of the main room and down a short corridor to a smaller space that served as both a storage room and a secondary communications backup. She pulled the door closed behind them. It was colder in here, significantly colder. I want to know what you think, she said. He wasn't expecting that. About what's happening. Your read, not what the briefing told you what you think. He considered it seriously. She was watching him with the same quality of attention she'd had on all day, the kind that made dishonesty feel not just wrong but genuinely inefficient. I think the timing is too clean, he said. The storm coming and the movement on the ridge our being here, it's too coordinated to be coincidence from either side. Which means either someone compromised the deployment timing on our end, or whoever is moving up that ridge has better intelligence about this facility than they should. Elena's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes sharpened slightly. Go on. Which also means, he stopped. Say it. Which means someone who knows about this place, about the relay station, about who's here, that person isn't on the ridge. The room was very quiet. You think there's an inside source? Elena said. I think it's possible. 14 people in this facility. I know. She looked at him for a long moment. The cold was pulling at both of them, and neither of them moved toward the door. You're smarter than you act, she said. I act like who I was 6 months ago, he said. I'm still catching up to who I am now. She nodded once, that operational nod. Don't say anything about this to anyone except Torres. You trust Torres. Torres didn't laugh this morning. Jackson absorbed that. That's your metric. One of them. She pulled the door open. 14 people is a lot of people when you don't know which ones you are actually safe with. Keep your assessments to yourself until we know more. She walked back out into the corridor. He stood in the cold storage room for exactly 2 seconds processing what had just happened. Then he followed her, 21:31 hours. The wind had found a new register. It had gone from something you heard to something you felt in the structure of the building itself, a deep, slow pressure that came in intervals like the mountain was breathing. Outside, the temperature had dropped to -17. The storm's leading edge was still 90 minutes out, but it was already announcing itself. Reyes found Jackson in the corridor and pulled him aside with the particular urgency of someone who had been sitting with something and could no longer sit quietly with it. I need to talk to you, Reyes said. Okay. Not here. Reyes looked down the corridor both ways. The equipment room. They went. Reyes closed the door. I've been thinking about Cross, Reyes said. Okay, Jackson said carefully. About the timeline. She shows up today of all days with the hostile movement happening tonight. You don't find that coincidental, Jackson said. No, I don't. But I don't find it suspicious either. Command sent her because they knew this was coming. Or she's here because she's connected to whoever is coming. The words landed in the cold room like something dropped from a height. Jackson looked at Reyes for a long moment. Reyes was smart. He was fast. He was the kind of person who thought around corners and usually found something useful there. But he was also the kind of person who, when he started building a narrative, sometimes built it before all the evidence was in and then retrofitted the facts to fit the frame. That's a significant accusation, Jackson said. I'm not accusing, I'm asking. You're doing both. You just dressed the accusation up as a question. Reyes's jaw tightened slightly. I'm saying we don't actually know who she is. We have Cole's word and a classified file we can't access, and a rifle case she carried in from God knows where. We're about to go into a serious situation with a woman nobody in this group has ever worked with, and all we have is her, Jackson said. Reyes stopped. All we have is her, Jackson said again, and her record, and 14 years of operations that didn't get her killed and got other people home, and a commander who trusts her with his life. He paused. I know it feels like not enough, but right now it's what we've got, and I need you to work with it instead of against it because this is not the moment for an internal investigation. Reyes was breathing a little harder than the situation required. And if you're right, Jackson said, you'll know it before the night is over. And if you're wrong, which you are, then the energy you spent on this is energy you didn't spend on something that would actually keep us alive. He moved toward the door. Come on. Reyes grabbed his arm, not hard, but with an urgency that made Jackson stop. Jackson, I'm serious. Something feels wrong. Jackson looked at him. He didn't dismiss it. You didn't dismiss it when a good operator said something felt wrong because good operators had feelings that were actually pattern recognition running faster than conscious thought. What specifically feels wrong? Jackson asked. Reyes thought about it. The comms, the way the satellite is cycling. It started too early for weather interference. I know. Cross flagged it 20 minutes ago. Reyes blinked. Something in his face shifted. She flagged it and switched to backup landline protocols and started logging the interruptions. She's already on it. Jackson looked at him steadily. Whatever is wrong tonight, she's ahead of it. That's not what an inside source looks like. Reyes let go of his arm. The wind hit the building hard enough that something in the ceiling creaked. Both of them looked up automatically. Old instinct. Check the structure. Okay, Reyes said quietly, like the word cost him something. Okay, Jackson confirmed. They went back. 2207 hours. Cole gathered everyone in the operations room, all 14 people. The support staff stood to one side looking with varying degrees of success like they were not frightened. Park had her logbook clutched in both hands. Harris the cook had appeared from somewhere with a large thermos of coffee and was distributing it with the solemn practicality of a man who understood that hot liquids were among the few things he could genuinely contribute to the current situation. Cole laid it out clean and simple. There was hostile movement detected on the northern approach, estimated arrival at the perimeter somewhere between 0100 and 0300. Weather would hit approximately the same window. Aircraft extraction was no longer an option until conditions cleared, which preliminary forecasts suggested would be sometime after 0800. They were self-contained and they were going to stay that way. Our objective is not engagement, Cole said. Our objective is facility security until extraction becomes viable. We hold. We maintain communication as possible. We protect the 14 people in this room. In the relay station, Okafor said. Cole glanced at Elena. That's secondary. The room shifted slightly. Okafor noticed. Why secondary? I thought the people in this room are primary, Cole said in a tone that closed the subject. Everything else comes after. He turned to Elena. Captain Cross, you want to walk through the defensive assignments. She stood up. She had her rifle with her now, not displayed, not made a point of, just present the way her competence was present as a simple fact of the environment. She assigned positions. The two communications technicians were to maintain the backup landline and document all contact attempts regardless of outcome. Support staff were assigned to interior security monitoring, interior access points, keeping people calm, staying away from exterior walls. Harris was told specifically to keep the coffee coming, and he nodded with genuine seriousness. The 6 candidates were assigned to the exterior perimeter in rotating pairs. Jackson with Torres, Reyes with Brennan, Martinez with Okafor. Cole would maintain mobile command between interior and perimeter. Questions on assignments, Elena asked. Silence. On engagement protocols? What are we authorized to do? Martinez asked. Defend the facility and the people inside it, Elena said. Minimum necessary force until we have positive identification of threat and intent. If someone is on the perimeter in this weather at 0200, They are probably not lost hikers, but positive identification matters. And if someone's already inside the perimeter, Reyes asked. Elena looked at him. Then we already have a different problem. Reyes nodded slowly. He was looking at her differently than he had that morning, or even an hour ago. Something in him had shifted and hadn't shifted back. Last thing, Cole said. He looked around the room at all 14 faces. This is a hard night. It's going to get harder. Some of you have trained for exactly this, and some of you haven't. That doesn't matter right now. He paused. What matters is that you trust the people standing next to you. You communicate. You do not go solo on decisions. You check in. His eyes went to Elena briefly, then back. We have the best person I know running this operation. Trust her and stay connected to each other, and we get through this. The room was very still. Then Elena said simply, get your gear, zero the comms. First rotation at the perimeter starts at 22:30. And the room moved. 22:29 hours. Jackson and Torres took the eastern perimeter. The wind was a living thing out here, directional and hostile, pressing against them with intelligent purpose. The visibility was maybe 40 meters and narrowing. The storm's main body was still 30 minutes out, but its outriders had arrived gusts that hit 50 miles per hour and then stopped completely, which was somehow worse than consistent wind because the silence afterward made you doubt what you just felt. They moved along the perimeter fence in the pattern Elena had specified. Checkpoint, hold, listen, move. Checkpoint, hold, listen, move. Not a rhythm, but a discipline. You doing okay? Torres asked. He had a way of asking that question that made it mean something different from the surface words. Yeah, Jackson said. I've been better. I've been worse. They moved. At checkpoint 3, Torres stopped. Hold up, he said quietly. Jackson stopped immediately. He had his hand on his weapon without consciously deciding to put it there. Torres was listening. His head was slightly tilted. The particular posture of someone parsing sounds in a complicated sonic environment. Then Jackson heard it too, or thought he heard it, a sound that wasn't wind and wasn't building, creak, and wasn't any of the organic settling noises of an outpost in a snowstorm. A sound that had direction, location, purpose. You hear that? Torres murmured. Yeah, east of the fence, maybe 30 meters. Jackson keyed his radio. Eagle 1 to base. Possible contact eastern perimeter, 30 meters outside fence line. Please advise. Static. Then Elena's voice clear and low. Copy Eagle 1, hold position. Do not advance. I'm sending Martinez and Okafor to back you. What was the sound? Movement? Possibly 2 separate sources? A pause. 3 seconds. It felt longer. 2 sources, Elena said. Moving or static? Moving slowly. Direction. Parallel to the fence line, east to north. Another pause. Copy. Martinez Okafor redirect to eastern perimeter. Eagle 1 maintain position and continuous radio contact. Do not, a burst of static interrupted her. Cleaned up. Do not engage without my word. Copy that, Jackson said. He and Torres held position. The cold pressed in on them from all sides. Jackson was aware of his own breathing in a way he wasn't usually aware of it, the specific rhythm the control required to keep it even. He thought about what Elena had said that afternoon. You'll feel it, and that feeling comes from experience. He was feeling something right now. He was deciding what to call it. The radio crackled again. But it wasn't Elena, it was Brennan. Eagle 3 to base, we've got something on the western approach. Brennan's voice was tight, controlled but tight. Multiple contacts. Moving fast. The night shifted. 23:11 hours. 2 locations simultaneously. Jackson registered the tactical implication in the same second he heard Brennan's voice, and he suspected everyone else did too. Whatever was on the eastern perimeter was a feint or a distraction, or the first arm of a pincer. The western approach was the real movement, or the western approach was the distraction, and the east was the real approach. Or both were real, and they were about to be pressed from 2 directions at once. He heard Cole's voice on the radio. All units report status. Eagle 1 eastern perimeter, 2 contacts moving north. Maintaining position. Eagle 2. That was Reyes. Western perimeter is clear from my position, but I can hear Brennan's contacts from here. They are moving fast. Eagle 3. Brennan again. Steadier now. I count 4, maybe 5. They're spreading out. Eagle 3 to base. They are spreading out. And then Elena's voice absolutely leveled the voice of someone watching a game board and seeing the pattern. Cole, northern approach. Check northern approach now. A pause of maybe 4 seconds. Cole's voice, and for the first time, Jackson heard something in it that wasn't control, but was the thing underneath control. Confirmed. Northern approach. I count at least 6. 6 on the north, 4 or 5 on the west, 2 on the east, 13 plus hostiles approaching simultaneously in near zero visibility, high wind sub-zero temperatures. Against 14 people, including support staff who weren't operators. Eagle 1, Elena said, your eastern contacts. They stopped moving, Jackson checked. Strained his hearing against the wind. Negative, still moving north. He stopped. They're converging, moving to link up with the northern approach. Copy, Elena said. Understood. A beat. Miller. Ma'am. Don't try to stop them. Let them move. Stay on the fence. He wanted to ask why. He didn't ask why. He said copy that. He trusted her. He was learning to trust her. Not because he'd been told to, because she kept being right at exactly the moments when being right mattered most. Torres touched his arm. When Jackson looked at him, Torres mouthed, perimeter breach is coming. Jackson nodded. He keyed his radio. Eagle 1 to base. Anticipate perimeter breach at Northeast Junction within 3 to 4 minutes. Copy Eagle 1. Elena's voice didn't waver. Return to interior defensive position. Northwest corridor. Go now. They went. The wind hit them like a wall as they moved, and Jackson ran with his head down and his mind doing multiple things, simultaneously tracking his position relative to the building, tracking the sounds around him for anything that indicated a source besides the storm, tracking his breathing and his footfall and the weight of his weapon and the ice forming on the surface of his gear. He thought very briefly and, with a clarity that surprised him, I am exactly where I need to be right now. Not in spite of the fear, because of what was on the other side of it. 28 hours. Inside the operations building, the atmosphere had changed in the particular way that closed spaces change when danger is real and near and no longer abstract. The 2 communications technicians were at their stations. Park's logbook was open. Support staff were at assigned positions doing the job they'd been given, holding on to a purpose the way people hold on to the thing that gives them something to do when there's nothing else to control. Harris had improbably made sandwiches. Nobody laughed about this. It was possibly the most useful thing anyone not trained for combat had contributed to the evening, and Jackson ate half of one standing up in the northwest corridor because Elena had told him to eat when he could, and she was apparently right about everything, so he ate. Elena was at the center of the room, radio in hand, running the defense with a quietness that was not calmness exactly, but was something that performed the function of calmness for everyone around her. She was tracking 5 different positions simultaneously. She was processing radio reports from 6 candidates and Cole and occasionally Park, who was monitoring the communications equipment, with the intensity of someone who understood their job, had become genuinely critical. She gave orders in short, complete sentences with no wasted syllables. Okafor, move 3 meters south, you're exposed. Reyes, hold your position, do not advance. Brennan, what's your sight line from current position? Can see maybe 20 meters. The snow is, stay where you are. Don't move to improve your sight line. Copy. Jackson watched her and understood something he hadn't understood completely before. The thing she was doing wasn't just tactical management. It was a much more specific kind of work. She was managing the terror in the room. Every short, clear order she gave was also a message that said someone knows what's happening. Someone is making decisions. Someone has done this before and is doing it now, and the system is functioning. That message was as important as the tactical content, maybe more important. He thought about what Cole had said. The reason people like you are still alive. He understood it differently now. It wasn't just about the technical excellence. It was about this, the ability to be the fixed point in a room that was trying to spin. Eagle 1, Elena said without looking at him. East corridor, window 2. Tell me what you see. He moved to window 2 in the east corridor, looked out into the storm dark. I can see about 15 meters, nothing visible on the approach. They're already past that position, she said. They're at the northwest perimeter junction. Reyes, confirm. Confirmed, Reyes said on the radio. I have visual on I count 7, 8. They've breached the outer perimeter. Silence. Then Cole's voice. Positions. Everyone positions. They are inside the perimeter. And then something happened that stopped everyone for exactly 1 second. Elena's radio made a sound that wasn't the right sound. Not static, not weather interference. A deliberate signal, 3 short pulses of pause, 2 long ones. A code. Park looked up from her station. Her face had gone the specific color of someone who has just understood something they very much didn't want to understand. Captain Cross, Park said. Elena was already looking at her. That's signal, Park said. That's a facility identification code. It's our code. Someone outside this building just transmitted our facility ID code. The room went very still. Can you tell us from where? Elena said. Park's hands moved over her equipment. It came from inside the perimeter. She looked up. Inside the outer fence, but outside the building. Elena was already moving. Cole, lock down the building. All external access, now. Cole moved. What is it? Jackson asked. He was at her shoulder and he didn't know exactly when that had happened. Whoever breached the perimeter, Elena said quietly, not for the room but for him, had our facility code. You can only transmit that code if you have equipment calibrated to this facility's frequency and the current rotating cipher. She looked at him. That cipher rotated at 2100 tonight. 6 hours after we arrived, Jackson said. 3 hours after I arrived, she said. Which means the cipher was compromised sometime today. After we were all here, the inside source, not a suspicion anymore, a fact. Jackson's mind ran through it fast. 14 people, 6 candidates who hadn't known about this facility 24 hours ago. Cole, who had served with Elena, and whose loyalty was not in question, or was it 4 support staff? 2 communications technicians, one of whom was Park, who was currently white-faced and clearly alarmed in a way that looked entirely genuine. Harris the cook. Who had access to the cipher rotation tonight? Jackson asked. 3 people, Elena said. Cole, Park, and the senior communications technician, Halverson. Where's Halverson? Elena looked around the room. Halverson was not in the room. When did he leave? Elena said to the room, to everyone, her voice sharp. Nobody answered immediately. Then one of the support staff, a young man named Garrett, said, he went to the secondary comms room about 40 minutes ago. Said the equipment needed physical adjustment. It couldn't be done remotely. Secondary comms room. Jackson was already moving. Elena put a hand on his arm. He stopped. Not alone, she said. Then come with me. Cole, she said. With us. Torres, you have the room. Torres stepped into the center without a word, like he'd been waiting for the assignment. 0004 hours. The secondary comms room was at the end of the east corridor, the same corridor where Jackson had been standing 20 minutes ago, looking out into the storm. The door was closed, no light visible under it. They stood outside it for exactly 2 seconds. Cole was to Elena's right. Jackson was behind and to her left. Elena listened at the door, then she opened it. The room was empty. The communications equipment was on powered-up, running indicators lit and set to a configuration that nobody had authorized. Park's backup landline protocol had been overridden. The satellite uplink had been restored and was transmitting, and set to transmit to a frequency that wasn't in any military catalog Jackson had ever seen. He's been transmitting our position, Cole said. His voice was very controlled. The control of a man deciding what to do with something he can barely stand to hold. For how long? Jackson asked. Elena was at the equipment, reading the log. Since 2300, he gave them an hour, enough time to get into position. She looked up. He's been coordinating the approach timing. The movements on all 3 sides, east, west, north, they weren't independent scouts. They were responding to real-time information from inside this building. Where is he now? Jackson said. Elena looked at the door on the far side of the communications room. The exterior door, the one that opened to the east side of the building. It was not fully closed. The cold coming through the gap was specific and absolute. He went out, Elena said. To them, Cole said. To guide them in, Elena said. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Jackson said, he knows the building layout. Yes, Elena said. He knows where everyone is positioned. Yes. He knows where the communications equipment is, where the backup systems are, what our defensive configuration looks like. Yes, Elena was already moving back toward the main room, which means we have about 4 minutes before whoever is outside this building has a complete picture of every defensive position we hold. She pushed the door open, and about 3 before they use it. 0009 hours. The next 12 minutes were the most concentrated and brutal minutes Jackson Miller had lived through in his life up to that point. It started with the lights. They went out. Not gradually, not flickering. They went out the way things go out when the decision has been made complete in instant and without negotiation. The facility dropped into a darkness that the emergency lighting struggled against and mostly lost, casting everything in a dim red that made familiar spaces feel like somewhere else entirely. Someone in the main room made a sound that wasn't quite a word. Elena's voice came out of the darkness like something solid to hold on to. Nobody move. Stay in position. Sound off. They sounded off all 6 candidates, Cole, Park, all 4 support staff, Harris, 12 people, 13 including Elena. Halverson was outside with whoever had come up the mountain. 14 minus 1. Secure all interior doors, Elena said. Park, what do you have on backup power? Generator should kick in a mechanical sound from somewhere under the building. Now we're on generator. Main system's coming back online in 60 seconds. Communications. Backup landline is, Park's voice changed texture. Backup landline is down. He cut it before he left. A beat of silence. What do we have? Elena said. Short-range radio between internal positions, Park said. That's it. Satellite. He said it to transmit. I can try to reset the configuration, but it'll take... Do it, Elena said. Do it now. How long? 6 minutes, maybe 8. You have 4. A sound from the north wall. Not wind, not structure. A sound that had intention behind it. They're at the north face, Cole said. He had moved to a position near the north corridor without Jackson hearing him do it. External door is secured, but a sound like something hitting the door hard. Once, then again. Barricade it, Elena said. Cole moved. Jackson was already moving with him. They pulled a heavy equipment rack across the corridor and put their weight behind it, and the next impact from outside hit the door, and the door held and the rack held, and for one specific second, they were all breathing at the same rate. Then the east corridor window broke. The explosion of cold air that came through it was almost a physical object. And in the 3 seconds while everyone's attention went to the sound of breaking glass, the west exterior door, which had been secured but not barricaded, which had been on Reyes's position, opened. Not broke, opened. From the inside. Reyes's voice came on the radio tight and sharp and high in a way Jackson had never heard from him before. West door is open. How is the west door open? I secured this. Reyes, step back, Elena said. I don't see step back right now. A scuffle. Movement in the dim red emergency light. Jackson was running for the west corridor, and Torres was running beside him, and ahead of them both somehow already there was Elena. She came around the corner into the west corridor in a way that Jackson would spend a long time trying to describe afterward and never quite get right, low and fast, and with the absolute economy of movement that you recognize instantly when you see it because it looks nothing like drama and nothing like performance and everything like something that has been built through years of doing the thing for real. She said stop, and whoever had come through the west door stopped. There were 2 of them. In the dim red light in full cold weather gear, anonymous and dark. They had stopped because the voice that had said stop carried in its single syllable the complete weight of absolute certainty. The certainty of someone who has been in the exact position of the person who does not stop and knows every possible outcome of that choice and is prepared for all of them. Hands, Elena said. They raised their hands. And in the dim red light, Jackson saw something he had not expected to see. One of them was Halverson. But the other one standing beside him with his hands raised and his face turned toward Elena, with an expression that Jackson would later struggle to name, but eventually settled on as the expression of someone who has just understood they miscalculated something fundamental, was not a hostile. He was wearing civilian clothes and he was carrying a field radio set to a frequency Jackson recognized because Cole had used the same frequency in the initial briefing, and around his neck on a lanyard, he was carrying the kind of identification badge that you only carried if you were operating at a level that very few people in any building ever saw. He was federal intelligence. He was on their side. And he was also unmistakably the reason the situation had escalated to exactly this point. Cap Cross, the man said, his voice was strained. This was a controlled operation. It was supposed to. I know what it was supposed to do, Elena said. Her voice had not changed, not 1 degree. Hands where I can see them, both of you. Don't talk. You have to listen to me. I have 12 people in the main room who think they are fighting for their lives right now, Elena said, and for the first time there was something in her voice that wasn't just operational, something that had been compressed for hours under the discipline of the situation and was present now in this moment in exactly the amount that was necessary and not 1 unit more. Whatever your operation was supposed to do, it almost did something else. Do not talk until I have this building secure. The man closed his mouth. Halverson's face was the face of someone who had believed in what he was doing right up until the moment he was standing in a red-lit corridor with his hands in the air in front of a woman who was not doing what he'd expected her to do, which was be overwhelmed. He had miscalculated her. He had made the same mistake Jackson Miller had made at noon that day. He had looked at her and made a decision about what he saw. He was going to spend a long time thinking about that. Miller, Elena said without turning around. Ma'am, get Cole. He went, 0031 hours. It took 11 minutes to get the building fully secured and another 6 for Park to reset the satellite communications and establish contact with headquarters. The contacts that had been on the northern and western approaches had withdrawn. They were, Elena explained in a voice that was remarkably even, given the circumstances, part of the same operation. A covert exercise in facility vulnerability that had gone sideways when it encountered conditions and personnel that the operations designers had not adequately accounted for. Halverson was not a traitor. He was an asset, playing his assigned role in an exercise that nobody at Raven Peak, not Cole, not the candidates, not the support staff, had been informed about. Nobody except Elena. She had been sent here knowing. The only question was whether the facility and the people in it would hold against a coordinated assault that was designed to feel from the inside exactly like the real thing. They had held. Jackson sat in a chair in the main operations room at 043 hours, with a cup of Harris's coffee that had gone cold and didn't care. The overhead lights were back on full power, not emergency red. The room felt different in normal light. Larger somehow, more itself. Torres was next to him, not talking, not needing to. Across the room, Cole was on a call with headquarters that had started at 038 and showed no signs of ending. His voice was quiet and controlled, and Jackson suspected that the conversation was not going the direction that whoever designed the exercise had anticipated. Reyes came and sat on Jackson's other side. For a moment, none of them said anything. Then Reyes said she knew. Yes, Jackson said. She knew the whole thing, the whole exercise. She came here knowing what was going to happen, and she walked us through it without ever, he stopped, without ever telling us it wasn't real. It was real, Jackson said. Every decision you made tonight was a real decision. Every piece of fear you felt was real fear. Everything you learned about yourself was real, Torres finished. Reyes was quiet for a moment. He was doing something with his hands, turning a small object over and over. Jackson saw it was a compass, the one from the navigation exercise that afternoon. He'd been carrying it since then. She's better than I thought a person could be at this, Reyes said. Not like an admission, like a fact he was filing away carefully. Yeah, Jackson said. And we were, Jackson said. All of us. Reyes looked at him. Except Torres, Jackson added. Torres said nothing, but the corner of his mouth moved. Across the room, Elena was seated at the far end of the table where she'd been sitting when they arrived. She had her rifle case beside her. She was writing something in a small notebook, not a report. It didn't look like a report. It looked like the kind of writing people do when they're processing something internally and giving it a private form. She wasn't looking at the room. She wasn't monitoring. She had done the thing that needed doing, and now she was doing whatever she did in the quiet that came after. She hadn't celebrated. She hadn't summarized. She hadn't performed any of the things that Jackson had expected, some kind of revelation, some version of, and now you understand, some moment of acknowledged triumph. She was just sitting there, writing in her notebook. Like the most important night any of them had ever lived through was simply something that had happened and was now over. And the next thing was already approaching, and she was making herself ready for it. Jackson Miller looked at her across the room and understood for the first time completely what Commander Cole had been trying to tell them. Some people aren't impressive because they broadcast their capability. They're impressive because they don't need to, because the work speaks, because the results are the only testimony that matters. He finished his cold coffee. He set down the cup. And outside, somewhere beyond the walls of Raven Peak, the storm that had been building all night finally reached the mountain in full, and the wind hit the building like a wave hitting a shore, and the lights flickered once and held, and inside the operations room, nobody flinched, because they were not the same people who had walked through that door 12 hours ago. And they all knew it. And in the corner, Iron Wolf kept writing, 0117 hours. The debrief with headquarters lasted 47 minutes. And when Cole came off the call, he sat down in his chair and did not speak for almost 30 seconds. That was unusual enough that everyone in the room noticed it. Cole was not a man who needed 30 seconds to collect himself. He was a man who had spent his entire career being the person who was already collected when everyone else was still finding their footing. When he finally spoke, he looked directly at Elena. "They're calling it a partial success," he said. Elena did not look up from her notebook immediately. When she did, her expression was the same expression she'd been wearing since they arrived, that complete, contained, entirely unreadable quality that Jackson had spent the last 12 hours learning to parse differently. "Which part do they consider unsuccessful?" she asked. "The early identification of the insider element," Cole said. "They expected it to run longer before anyone spotted the comms anomaly." "Park spotted it," Elena said. "Not me." "Park spotted it because you told her to log everything with timestamps," Cole said. "Same difference." Elena looked back at her notebook. "It's not the same difference. Park did the work. She should hear that from someone official." Cole looked at Park, who was still at her communication station and had clearly heard every word of this exchange and was trying to look like she hadn't. Park looked up. "Well done tonight," Cole said. "Genuinely." Park's composure held for about 2 seconds, and then something in her face shifted that was neither professional nor composed, but was entirely human. "Thank you, sir." Cole turned back to Elena. "The operations lead the man Halverson brought through the west door. Agent Corbin, he wants to debrief you." "I know what he wants." "Elena," she closed her notebook. "Where is he?" "Secondary room." She stood, picked up her rifle, not as a weapon, just as the thing she carried, the way some people carry a coat or a bag, present and natural and unremarkable. She walked toward the corridor door. Jackson was on his feet before he'd consciously decided to stand up. "Can I come up?" She looked at him over her shoulder. "A beat. Stay close and don't interrupt." He followed her. 0124 hours. Agent Corbin was a man in his late 40s who carried himself with the specific energy of someone accustomed to being the most informed person in any room he entered. He had the kind of controlled face that came from a career of conversations where the wrong expression had consequences. He was sitting at the table in the secondary comms room with his hands folded in front of him and his field radio on the table beside him, and when Elena walked in, he did not stand up. That was the first thing Jackson noticed. He did not stand up. Elena sat across from him without being invited to. Jackson stood behind her and to the left, which put him in Corbin's sightline without being directly in front of him. "Captain Cross," Corbin said. "Agent Corbin," Elena said. "You ran the exercise effectively." "I ran the facility effectively," Elena said. "The exercise was yours. I was managing the actual situation." Corbin's expression shifted by a very small amount. "The exercise was controlled. The exercise had a moving external element, an interior asset with incomplete information, a communications compromise that ran for over an hour and 6 candidates who didn't know what they were dealing with." Elena looked at him evenly. "Those are not controlled variables. All within acceptable risk parameters," Corbin said. "Your parameters," Elena said. "Not mine." A pause. "You didn't inform me about the interior asset," Elena said. "You didn't need to know about Halverson specifically. You needed to know there was a vulnerability. I needed to know that a person in this facility was going to transmit our cipher and open a door from the inside," Elena said. Her voice was exactly as level as it had been all night. That was somehow more pointed than Ray's volume would have been. Because there is a difference between running a defense and running a defense while one of your own people is actively working against you. The psychological weight of that difference is significant. The tactical adjustments required are different. The decisions about who to trust and when to share information. She stopped, deliberately. Those decisions could have gotten people hurt. But they didn't, Corbin said. Not tonight, Elena said. The two of them looked at each other across the table, and Jackson had the very clear impression that this was not the first time they'd had a version of this conversation, and that it would not be the last. The operation has a second phase, Corbin said. The room did something that rooms can't technically do, which is become more still than they already are. Excuse me, Elena said. The Raven Peak exercise was phase 1, Corbin said. Assessment of facility security under pressure and evaluation of candidate performance in high-stress, unscripted scenarios. He reached into his jacket and placed a sealed folder on the table. Phase 2 was always contingent on phase 1 results. Elena looked at the folder. She did not touch it. What is phase 2? Jackson asked. Corbin looked at him, a long assessing look. You're Miller. Yes. Your phase 1 performance was noted. What is phase 2? Jackson said again. Corbin looked back at Elena, the relay station that this facility protects. It's been transmitting for 14 years. In the last 72 hours, we've detected an anomaly in the signal that suggests, he paused. That suggests someone has been piggyback riding the transmission for an unknown period of time. Elena's stillness changed quality. It became the specific stillness of someone who has just heard information that reorganizes something they thought they understood. How long is unknown, she said. Months, possibly longer? The station is automated, Elena said. Monitored remotely. Nobody physically. Nobody was supposed to physically access it, Corbin said. Which is why the anomaly took so long to detect. You need someone to go to the station, Elena said. I need someone to go to the station, Corbin said. In the next 8 hours before the signal window closes, and whoever is using the transmission has time to react to the phase 1 activity here and shut it down. Jackson did the math. 8 hours, 0100 now, in full storm conditions, 14 kilometers to the relay station, on terrain that had been covered in the navigation exercise yesterday and in the briefing before that, and by Elena's personal knowledge of the mountain's specific current state. That's not a training exercise, Jackson said. No, Corbin said, it's not. Elena picked up the folder. She opened it. She read it for what felt like a very long time and was probably 90 seconds. Then she closed it and set it back on the table. I'm going, she said. I know, Corbin said. That was never in question. I'm taking Miller and Torres. Corbin hesitated. They're candidates. They're not cleared for... They just spent 8 hours doing a classified operation they didn't know was classified, Elena said. That question is already answered. Corbin looked at the folder, looked at Elena, made a decision. They're your responsibility. They always were, she said. She stood, picked up her rifle, looked at Jackson. Go get Torres, she said. Tell him to gear up. Full cold weather. Tell him we have 4 hours of good darkness left, and we need all of it. Jackson went. 0208 hours. Torres' reaction to being woken at 2 in the morning and told to put on full cold weather gear for an unspecified real operation was to say quietly and without drama, give me 4 minutes. He was ready in 3. They met Elena in the equipment room. She had her pack on and her rifle in hand, and she was checking the gear with the same precise economy of movement that Jackson had watched all day, each element examined and confirmed without ceremony. She looked at both of them when they came in. This is real, she said. Not an exercise. Not a controlled scenario. The mountain in the dark, in a full storm, 14 kilometers to a specific structure, access and assessment 14 kilometers back. Copy, Torres said. Jackson, she said. I'm ready, he said. I'm not asking if you're ready. I'm asking if you understand the difference between tonight and this morning. He thought about that seriously. He knew she didn't want the reflexive affirmative. She wanted the actual answer. This morning we were running an exercise that felt real. Tonight, we're running a real operation that could go in any direction, and you're not going to be able to control all the variables. And, she said, and I need to trust myself the way I trust you, he said. Not to defer to your judgment at every moment, to think alongside it. She looked at him for a moment. Then she turned toward the exterior door. Stay within arm's reach unless I tell you otherwise. Match my pace. If I stop, you stop. If I move fast, you move faster. She opened the door. The storm came in. It was different from the cold that had been seeping through the building all night. This was complete and total a physical environment that pressed on every surface of a person at once. The wind hit at an angle not straight on which was almost more destabilizing than direct force. Jackson took 2 steps through the door and recalibrated everything he thought he knew about moving in cold weather. Elena was already moving. He matched her pace, 0 to 41 hours. 300 meters from the facility, with the building lights no longer visible behind them, Jackson had a moment. He would not call it doubt exactly. It wasn't the kind of uncertainty that makes a person slow down or second-guess the direction they're moving. It was more specific than that, a sharp internal clarity that said you are doing something real. Not training, not assessment, real, and there is no guarantee about how this ends. He registered it, let it be what it was, and kept moving. Torres was directly behind him, matching stride for stride. Jackson could hear him breathing steady, controlled the breathing of someone who had done a specific kind of work on their fear response. Not eliminating it, managing it, like Elena had been trying to tell them from the very first moment. Fear keeps you alive. What kills you is letting it make your decisions. Elena stopped. Jackson stopped. Torres stopped. The wind was doing something between them and the landscape that made the next 30 meters a question rather than a statement. Elena was reading it, tilting her head, her weight shifting slightly, making calculations that didn't involve language. Eastern route, she said, not loudly. They were close enough that she didn't need to be. The map had Western as primary, Torres said. Not a contradiction, just noting. The map was accurate 3 days ago, Elena said. The drainage on the Western approach shifted. There's ice below the snow, and it's the wrong kind of ice, Eastern. She moved. They moved. Jackson thought about what she'd said in the navigation exercise. The feeling comes from experience, and the experience comes from paying attention. And the paying attention starts right now. She was feeling the mountain. Not metaphorically, literally reading it through the pressure on her feet and the angle of the wind and information he didn't know how to name yet because he didn't have enough experience to have named it. But he was starting to feel the beginning of the thing she was describing. He made a note of it, stored it. That information belonged to him now. 3:19 hours. They were 6 kilometers out when Elena stopped again, and this time the stop was different. She crouched. Jackson and Torres went down with her without being told to. She was looking at something. Not with binoculars. She hadn't taken her eyes off the terrain ahead, just changed the quality of her attention. She held her position for maybe 20 seconds. Jackson counted. Then she said very quietly, "We have company." Every nerve in Jackson's body fired simultaneously. "Where?" Torres breathed. 2 o'clock, 30 meters, not moving. Jackson looked. He could not see them. He was looking at exactly the right angle and the right distance, and he could not see them. The storm in the dark made the distance between visibility and invisibility razor thin. "How many?" Torres asked. "1 visible, which means at least 2. "Military," Jackson asked. "The equipment they're using to stay this still in this temperature is military grade," Elena said. "Whether the people carrying it are acting in any official capacity right now." She stopped. "That's the question." "Are they watching the relay station?" Jackson asked. "They're watching the approach to it," Elena said, "which means they know we're coming or they're watching for anyone who might come." She was still crouched, completely motionless, reading the shape of the situation the way she read everything, not guessing, assessing. "This changes the approach." "How?" Torres said. "We don't go around them," Elena said. "Going around means losing time, and this mountain doesn't have extra time available tonight. We go through." She paused. "Which means we need to draw the attention somewhere else for about 90 seconds. Jackson knew before she finished the thought. "Torres and I." "Torres," Elena said, 50 meters north make enough noise to be a person who's lost in the storm and looking for shelter. Authentic confusion, not a performance. 90 seconds. Then get low and move south along the ridgeline back to me." Torres looked at her. "And Jackson?" "Jackson comes with me," she said. Torres didn't argue. He knew the assignments and he trusted them, and he moved north into the dark with the efficiency of someone who had already made peace with the decision. Jackson watched him go and felt something in his chest that he didn't fully examine because this was not the moment for internal examination. Ready? Elena said. Yes, he said. When we're at the contact position, do not engage unless I engage first. If I engage, match me. If I drop, you keep moving. The station is 60 degrees true north from the contact point. 47 meters, you will find it. He heard what was underneath that last sentence, the part she wasn't saying but was including. You're not going to drop, he said. She looked at him, in the dark and the storm, in the negative temperatures with the wind pressing everything flat. She looked at him with the same quality of attention she'd been giving him all day. No, she said, I'm not planning to. She moved. He moved with her. 30 meters, 20. The figure at 2 o'clock was becoming shaped dark against dark, the kind of presence that only becomes visible when you're close enough that visible doesn't help you anymore. From the north, Tora's voice came. Not words exactly, the sounds a person makes when they're cold and confused and stumbling, the involuntary noises of someone in distress. Authentic, not performance. It worked because Torres was genuinely cold, and the distress he accessed was real, even if its expression was directed. The figure moved, north, toward Torres, and Elena moved through the space it had vacated like water moving around a stone. Jackson was right behind her. They cleared the contact point. The relay station was exactly where she said it would be. 0338 hours. The structure was small and heavily built, the kind of construction that existed to survive environments and not to comfort the people inside them. The door was coded, not keyed, a 6-digit entry system that Elena produced from the folder Corbin had given her without hesitation or fumbling. Inside was warm, relatively. The difference from outside was significant enough that Jackson's body had to adjust for it, recalibrating the threat assessment, when warmth itself felt like a change. The equipment room was compact and dense with hardware that Jackson recognized in general form and not in specific function. Banks of receivers and transmitters, processors, storage units, cables running in organized patterns that someone had maintained carefully and recently. What are we looking for? Jackson said. A secondary device, Elena said. Something that doesn't belong here. It could be hardware, a physical attachment somewhere on the primary transmitter. It could be a software injection. She was already moving through the equipment. Start at the primary unit, work outward. Jackson moved to the primary transmitter, looked at it carefully, ran his hands along the connections, not touching, examining, looking for anything that had been added, any wire that ran to a place it shouldn't run, any device housing that was slightly different from the rest. He found nothing on the primary unit. He moved to the secondary. Elena, he said. She was there in 3 steps. He pointed. Between the secondary transmitter and the main processing array, there was a connection that shouldn't exist. A small device, no larger than 2 fingers wide, wired into the signal path with the kind of care that only comes from someone who knows exactly what they're doing and exactly what they're trying to hide. It was good work, patient and precise and almost invisible. Almost. That's it, Elena said. Her voice was level, but something in it had changed, the kind of change that happens when you've been looking for something and found it, and the finding of it confirms something you were hoping not to confirm. Can you date it? Jackson looked at the connection points, the wire ends, the slight oxidation on the contact surfaces. This wasn't installed recently. He made himself slow down and read it right. This is months old, maybe more. Longer than the last maintenance visit, Elena said, which means someone came here outside the maintenance schedule, Jackson said. Or someone was here during the maintenance visit, Elena said, and wasn't just doing maintenance. The weight of what that meant settled over both of them. Someone with authorized access, Jackson said. Yes. Someone who knew what they were looking for. Yes. And they've been using this transmitter for months, piggybacking our signals, using our encryption to carry their traffic. He looked at her. Who? That's not our question tonight, Elena said. Our question tonight is the device. Document it, photograph every connection. Don't remove it. Don't remove it. He heard the surprise in his own voice. If we remove it, they know we found it. Right now, they don't know we found it. She pulled out a compact camera from her jacket. We document, we leave it in place. We give intelligence exactly what it needs to trace the traffic backward. She handed him the camera. Start here. Work systematically. We have maybe 12 minutes before whoever is outside reconfigures their watch pattern. He started documenting. She was at the central processing unit running her own check. Her hands moved fast and accurate, the movements of someone who had done this kind of work in this kind of environment before and knew which shortcuts were safe and which ones weren't. Elena, he said while he was photographing. Keep shooting, she said. Who could have accessed this place? I mean, the list of people with authorization to be here. Is not long, she said. How not long? A pause. Single digits. He kept the camera moving. And Corbin knows about all of them. Corbin commissioned the investigation that found the anomaly, Elena said, which means Corbin or someone in Corbin's chain is either the person who found a genuine breach or the person who decided it was time for the breach to be found. Jackson stopped photographing. He looked at her. She looked at him. Keep shooting, she said quietly. We document everything and we get out and we give the information to people above Corbin's clearance level and we let them sort it out. And if those people are also Jackson, her voice was not sharp. It was the voice you use when you need someone to focus and you trust them enough to just say it directly. One thing at a time, he kept shooting. 0402 hours. They were out of the station in 11 minutes. The door closed behind them and the lock engaged and the equipment inside kept running and the device kept transmitting, carrying its hidden traffic on the back of communications that were supposed to be secure, and now someone knew about it and the people using it didn't know that someone knew. Torres was waiting exactly where Elena had said to meet him. He was flat on the ground 15 meters south of the contact point, invisible in the way a trained person becomes invisible when they have 4 minutes and the right motivation. He came up when Elena passed the signal. Clean, he asked. Clean, Elena said. Moving. They moved. The return route was different from the approach. Elena took them northwest first, then angled south a longer path, but one that kept them away from the contact position where whoever was watching had been stationed. The storm was at its peak now. Visibility was down to 10 meters. They moved in a line, Elena leading Jackson in the middle, Torres covering the rear. Jackson thought while he moved with the specific quality of thinking that comes when your body is fully occupied and your mind has space to do what it does without getting in its own way. He thought about the device in the relay station, about the months of unauthorized traffic it had been carrying, about the single-digit list of people with authorized access, about Corbin sitting in the secondary comms room with his hands folded and his field radio on the table, and his confidence that the operation had been controlled. He thought about Elena's voice when she said, give the information to people above Corbin's clearance level. He thought about the fact that she had been sent here, not just to run a training exercise, not just to manage a covert assessment. She had been sent here by someone who knew about the anomaly in the signal and wanted someone they trusted, someone who didn't owe Corbin anything, someone whose loyalty ran to a different North Star to be on this mountain when it mattered. He thought she was never just protecting the facility. He thought she was protecting the investigation. He thought, and she did it without telling any of us what we were actually part of. He almost stopped moving. He kept moving, but the thought stayed with him for 44 hours. The facility lights came up out of the dark ahead of them, and Jackson felt the particular physical sensation of something in his body that had been running on maximum tension for the last 3 hours, beginning very carefully to relax. The wind had not let up. The storm was going to run through dawn and possibly past it. They were coming in from the west, which put the wind directly against them for the last 200 meters, which was deeply unpleasant and completely irrelevant to anything that mattered. Cole was at the door when they came in. He looked at Elena. She looked at him. Something passed between them that was years of history compressed into 1 second. Good, Cole asked. We need to talk, Elena said. Just you and me, now. Cole nodded. They went. Jackson and Torres stood in the entrance corridor, with snow melting off their gear, and their faces doing the gradual, uncomfortable process of returning to normal temperature. Harris appeared from somewhere and gave them coffee, and this time Jackson was not going to pretend the coffee wasn't the most important thing to happen in the last hour. Torres said, "You gonna tell me what happened at the station?" Jackson held his coffee with both hands and looked at the door Elena and Cole had disappeared through. There was a device, he said. Someone's been using the relay. Months of unauthorized traffic. Torres processed this. How big? We don't know yet. And Corbin, Jackson looked at him. Torres understood immediately. It was one of the useful things about Torres. He followed the logic of a situation without needing it spelled out. You think Corbin is involved. I think Elena thinks Corbin might be involved. Or someone above him, or someone who has enough access to his operation to have used it as cover. Torres was quiet for a moment. Then he said something that Jackson had not expected him to say. She told you about Corbin in there, at the station. Yes. She didn't have to do that, Torres said. She could have just said, document it and let's go, and you would have done exactly that. Yeah. She told you because she wanted you to understand the full picture, Torres said, not just your part in it. He paused. That's not what you do with a candidate. That's what you do with someone you're starting to trust. Jackson thought about that. He thought about the navigation exercise. Act like nobody's watching. The secondary comms room. Don't say anything about this to anyone except Torres. The gear up at 0200. You need to trust yourself the way you trust me. A progression, not accidental. She'd been building something in him all day, not just assessing, building. And she'd been doing it the same way she did everything else, without announcement, without performance, through the simple, repeated practice of treating him like someone capable of being more than he was at the start of the day. 12 hours. The debrief between Elena and Cole took 31 minutes. When Cole came out of the room, he looked like a man who had processed something significant and was in the middle of deciding what to do with it. He gathered Jackson Torres and Reyes specifically, which told Jackson that Cole had chosen his people carefully, and they sat in the northeast corner of the main operations room, while support staff and the other candidates existed in a different social space on the other side of the room. Cole laid it out. Not everything Jackson understood, that Cole was giving them the information they needed and not the information that wasn't safe to distribute in an unsecured location with 14 people. But enough. The relay station breach was real and significant. Elena had documented it. The documentation was being transmitted to a specific channel above Corbin's direct oversight. Corbin was not being informed of this yet. The operation at Raven Peak, both the Phase 1 exercise and the Phase 2 incursion to the station, was now part of a much larger investigation that had been running quietly for almost 8 months. Why are you telling us? Reyes asked. Bluntly, in the way Reyes was sometimes blunt, which was honest without quite being diplomatic. Because you were in it, Cole said. You were inside this operation tonight, whether you knew it or not. What you did, what you saw, what you can attest to if this goes to a formal inquiry that's relevant. You deserve to know why. Reyes sat with that, then he said, and Cross. She knew all of this. She knew most of it, Cole said. Nobody knows all of it yet. But she was sent here specifically. Yes. By someone who trusted her specifically. Yes. Why her? Reyes said. Cole looked at Reyes for a long moment with the expression of someone deciding how much of a true answer to give. Because she has a record of doing the right thing in situations where doing the right thing is complicated and costly and doesn't come with any guarantee of support from the people above her. He paused. And because the person who sent her here knew that if the situation tonight went wrong in any of about 15 different ways, the outcome would still be better with her on this mountain than without her. Reyes absorbed this. The compass was still in his hands. He'd been carrying it all night. I was wrong about her, he said. Cole said, I know. I said things this afternoon that were, I know what you said, Cole said. She knows too. Reyes looked up. What does she think? Cole almost smiled. It didn't quite get there. She thinks you're a good operator who's still learning how to look past the first thing you see, he paused. Which is exactly what she said about Miller this morning, and look where Miller is now. Reyes looked across the room to where Jackson was standing alone near the east corridor, looking out the window at a darkness that was just starting at the very edges to consider becoming something else. He grew up fast tonight, Reyes said. That's what real situations do, Cole said, assuming you survive them. Jackson was at the east window when Elena found him. Not looking at anything specific, just looking at the dark and thinking the thoughts that come when a very long night is approaching its end and hasn't quite arrived there yet. She came and stood beside him. They didn't talk for a moment. Outside, the storm was still going, but the absolute peak of it was past. The wind had a different character now, less concerted, less intentional. moving from assault to persistence. You did good work tonight, Elena said. He looked at her. At the station. All of it, she said. The station was the easy part for you. He considered that. The earlier parts didn't feel easy. They weren't supposed to. The debrief with Corbin, when you told me about the inside source possibility. The moment at the West Corridor when Miller, she said. He stopped. I know what happened tonight, she said. You don't have to narrate it for me. A pause. What I'm telling you is that the person who walked through that door yesterday morning and the person standing here now are not the same person. And that matters. Not for what you did, for who you became while you were doing it. He was quiet for a moment, looking at the dark outside. Can I ask you something? He said. Yes. The things you've done before this, the classified operations, the missions nobody talks about, the situations where teams, he stopped choosing words, where teams didn't all come home. She waited. Does it get easier? He asked, carrying it. She looked at the window. Her reflection was barely there, the ghost of a person in the dark glass. No, she said, it doesn't get easier. He nodded. But it gets more organized, she said. You find a way to hold it that doesn't interfere with the next thing that needs doing. That's not the same as easier. It's just, she paused, more practiced. Is that enough? He asked. She looked at him. Something moved in her expression that was for one unguarded second entirely personal. Not the professional face, not the operational composure, just the face of someone who had asked herself that same question in the middle of many nights and had arrived at an answer she could live with. It has to be, she said. She moved away from the window. Get some sleep, she said. 2 hours minimum. We have a full debrief at 0800 and it's going to run long. Copy, he said. She walked across the main room without stopping or looking at Corbin, who was seated in a chair near the communication station, wearing the expression of a man who sensed that the landscape of the situation had shifted under him and was not yet sure in what direction. Corbin looked at Elena as she passed. She did not look at him. The light came slowly. Not sunrise exactly, not yet, not with the storm still running its last miles across the mountain, but a shift at the edge of the darkness, a lifting at the horizon that said the night was going, regardless of the weather, regardless of anything that had happened in the last 6 hours, regardless of what had been found and what had been documented and what was now in motion through channels that Corbin didn't control. Jackson Miller lay on a cot in the eastern bunk room and stared at the ceiling and was not asleep. He was not troubled exactly. He was processing. There's a difference, and at 24 years old, with one night behind him that had compressed approximately 3 years of development into approximately 12 hours, he was beginning to understand the difference clearly. He thought about the laugh. That morning in the operations room when he'd seen Elena sitting alone at the end of the table and laughed with the complete confidence of someone who didn't know yet what they didn't know. He thought about Cole's face when he said it. He thought about Elena's face, the complete contained absence of reaction, the way she'd simply continued reading her map. She had known what was coming that day. The exercise, the real operation underneath it, the breach at the relay station, the complexity of what she was walking into. And she had walked in quietly, with a small backpack and an old rifle case. No introduction, no announcement, because she didn't need one. Because the work she was about to do was going to speak for itself, and she had enough experience to know that and enough self-possession to wait for it. He thought about what Cole had said that first morning. Careful what you laugh at. It wasn't about Elena specifically, he understood now. It never had been. It was about everything, about every person, every situation, everything you encounter that doesn't look the way you expect it to look. The danger isn't malice. The danger is assumption. The danger is a laugh that comes before you know anything. He was still thinking about this when he heard Torres roll over on the cot across from him and say very quietly into the almost light of the bunk room, "You're not sleeping." "No," Jackson said. "You going to?" "Probably not." A pause. "That thing she said," Torres said, "at the station, that you could find it. 47 meters, 60 degrees, true north." "Yeah." She said it like Torres was working out how to say it. Like she wasn't just giving you directions. Like she was telling you something about yourself. Jackson stared at the ceiling. "Yeah," he said. "I heard that too." Somewhere in the facility, a door opened and closed. The sound of boots on the corridor floor. the particular pace of someone who knew where they were going and had already figured out what they needed to do when they got there. They both knew without discussing it that it was Elena, already moving, already on the next thing. The light at the edge of the window continued its slow arrival. Jackson closed his eyes, not to sleep, just to hold the night for one more minute before the morning came and changed everything into what happened next. Jackson didn't sleep. He lay on the cot for 90 minutes with his eyes closed and his mind doing what minds do when they've been given more material than they can process in the time available, running the same sequences over and over, not in anxiety, but in the specific way that experience gets converted into something permanent, the way the body makes sure it doesn't forget. At 0744, he got up. Torres was already gone. The bunk room was quiet, and the light coming through the small window on the east wall had the particular quality of early morning. After a storm, not bright, not warm, but genuinely present. The darkness of the last 6 hours had fully retreated. Whatever was going to happen today was going to happen in daylight. He found Harris in the mess area making eggs with the focused energy of someone who understood that feeding people was a form of care that didn't require explanation or permission. Harris looked up when Jackson came in, pointed at the coffee with his spatula, and went back to the eggs without saying anything. Jackson poured his coffee and sat at the small table and drank it in the silence that felt after last night like a genuine gift. Reyes came in 2 minutes later. He poured his own coffee. He sat across from Jackson. Neither of them spoke immediately, which was also different from yesterday morning. Yesterday morning, Reyes would have talked. He always talked, in the early hours, processing out loud, building his frame of the day verbally. This morning, he sat with his coffee and looked at the table and let the quiet be what it was. Eventually, Reyes said, "My grandfather used to say something." Jackson waited. He'd say, "The loudest person in the room is usually the most afraid." Reyes turned his coffee mug slowly with both hands. "I thought that was just something old people said." "And now, Tai," Reyes looked at him, "and now I've spent 12 hours watching a woman who said almost nothing run a situation that would have broken most people twice her size." He paused. So your grandfather was right," Jackson said. "My grandfather was right," Reyes said. Harris set plates of eggs in front of both of them without being asked. Jackson looked at the eggs and then at Harris and said, "Thank you." He meant it more specifically than the words covered. Harris nodded once, went back to his station. Some people show up in exactly the right way for exactly the right moment and never make a point of it. Jackson filed that away too. The formal debrief started exactly on time, which given the night they'd all had felt either impressive or slightly absurd, and Jackson wasn't sure which. All 14 people. Main operations room. Cole at the head of the table where he always stood when he was running something official. Corbin seated to Cole's left, which put him at the table but not at the head of it, a positioning that was either diplomatic or deliberate or both. Elena was at the far end of the table. Same seat as yesterday morning. Same quality of presence contained attending complete. Jackson sat midway down the right side. Torres next to him, Reyes across. The other candidates distributed around the table in the way people distribute when they've spent a hard night together and haven't yet consciously organized into social groups, but have already, without knowing it, arranged themselves by trust. Cole ran the opening summary clean and efficient. Timeline of events from 2100 the previous night through 0600. The Phase 1 exercise. The hostile approach from 3 directions. The perimeter breach. The interior security response. Phase 2, and here Cole paused just briefly enough that everyone who was paying attention noticed the pause, the incursion to the relay station. He did not look at Corbin when he said relay station. Corbin's expression did not change. Jackson watched both of them and understood that what was happening on the surface of this debrief was not the same as what was happening underneath it. Before I open to questions, Cole said, "I want to address performance." He looked around the table, not at the candidates specifically, at everyone. Every person in this room did their job last night. Some of you did your job in conditions you weren't trained for and hadn't expected, and you did it anyway. He paused. That deserves to be said plainly. Park made a sound that wasn't quite words. "Park," Cole said, "your logging of the communications anomaly was the first identification of the interior compromise. That's not a small thing. That's the kind of attention to detail that changes outcomes." Park nodded. Her composure was better this morning, but it was the composure of someone who'd spent some of the last 2 hours quietly sitting with the weight of what the previous night had actually been. Cole went through several other individual acknowledgments, specific, factual, without sentimentality. Okafor's position management on the Western approach, Brennan's communication clarity under pressure, Martinez's quick reorientation when the contact positions shifted. Then he looked at Jackson. "Miller," he said. Jackson waited. "Your assessment of the inside source possibility was correct and timely," Cole said. "You arrived at it independently, and you handled the information responsibly." A beat. That's good judgment in a complicated situation. Corbin looked at Jackson for the first time during the debrief. A measuring look, the kind that recategorizes a person. Jackson met it and didn't look away. Then Cole said, "Captain Cross." Elena looked at him. "This one's yours," Cole said. She looked around the room, not performing, just seeing the people in it, actually seeing them the way she'd been seeing them since the moment they arrived. "I'm not going to debrief the operation in this setting," she said. "The classified elements go through proper channels, and that's already in motion." She paused. "What I will say is this." The room listened. Last night was designed to test a facility's security response under compounded pressure. Multiple simultaneous threats, compromised communications, uncertain intelligence, a trust environment that had been deliberately complicated. She looked at the candidates. None of you knew that going in. You responded to something that felt completely real because you treated it as completely real. That's not a small thing. Reyes was very still across the table from Jackson. "But I want to talk about something that's not in any after-action report," Elena said. "Something that won't appear in any formal assessment of last night." She looked at Jackson specifically, then at Torres, then at Reyes. 12 hours ago, some of you looked at me and made a decision based on what you saw." The room shifted. "You didn't know my record. You didn't know my training history or my operational experience or what I'd been through to get to this room. You looked at me and you decided." She said it without accusation, without heat, as a simple observation of a thing that had happened. And that decision, that quick, comfortable, easy decision, put you at a disadvantage from the first minute of this rotation. Silence. "Here's what I need you to take away from that," she said. "Not guilt. Guilt is not useful. Not embarrassment. That doesn't help anyone." She paused. "I need you to take away the understanding that your assumptions are your first enemy. Before any hostile on any ridge, before any storm or equipment failure or communication compromise. Your assumptions about what you're looking at, those will get you killed faster than any external threat because they operate from inside and you don't always know they're there." The room was absolutely still. "The most dangerous thing you can be," Elena said, "is confident about something you haven't actually verified." She sat back. Cole nodded. Then Corbin said, "Captain Cross, the relay station documentation. You've indicated it's been transmitted through specific channels. Can you tell us which channels?" The room changed temperature. Not physically, emotionally. Everyone felt it. Elena looked at Corbin with the same contained expression she'd given him in the secondary comms room at 0100. "No," she said. "Simply." Corbin's jaw moved slightly. "This is a joint operation. Information sharing protocols require—" "Agent Corbin," Cole said. His voice was not loud. It was the voice he'd used once yesterday when everything stopped. "The documentation is being handled appropriately. The channels are appropriate. That subject is closed in this setting." Corbin looked at Cole. Cole looked back. Whatever Corbin saw in Cole's face made him stop talking. Jackson watched this exchange and felt very clearly the specific sensation of understanding that the story wasn't over. Not even close. What had been found at the relay station, who had put it there, who had known about it, and when those were threads that extended well beyond Raven Peak and the current room and the 14 people in it. Last night had been the first chapter of something much longer, and Elena Cross was at the center of it. The formal debrief closed and the room broke into smaller conversations, the way rooms do when the official structure lifts and people return to being people. The support staff clustered near the coffee machine. The communications technicians compared notes with their logbooks. Harris went back to the kitchen where the sounds of food preparation resumed with the reassuring inevitability of a person who knew that the next thing after a hard night was always breakfast. Jackson was heading for the east corridor when he heard Corbin's voice behind him. Not loud, not called out. Spoken at exactly the volume that reaches the specific person it's aimed at without carrying further. Miller. Jackson stopped. Turned. Corbin was alone. The room had thinned enough that they had a small, private bubble of space. He was carrying his field radio and the folder from the night before, and he had the look of a man who was used to having more information than the people around him and was currently experiencing the discomfort of the reverse. "You went to the relay station with her," Corbin said. "Yes." "What did you find?" Jackson looked at him. He thought about Elena's voice at 0338 in the cold and the dark with the device documented and the timer running. Give it to people above Corbin's clearance level. He thought about Cole's voice in the debrief. That subject is closed in this setting. "I'm not in a position to discuss that with you," Jackson said. Corbin studied him. "You're a candidate. You're 24 years old. You've been on this mountain for 36 hours. He said it matter-of-factly, not dismissively, which was almost worse. "You want to be very careful about the professional choices you make in the next 24 hours. Jackson heard the shape of that sentence clearly. The professional choices, the next 24 hours. It was a warning dressed as advice and dressed carefully. He looked at Corbin for a long moment. "I appreciate that," Jackson said. "Sir." He walked away. His hands were steady. He noticed that. He stored it. He found Elena in the storage corridor, the same cold back room where they talked about the inside source possibility at 21:30 the previous night. She was on a satellite call, standing with the phone pressed to her ear, speaking in a voice low enough that the words didn't carry. When she saw Jackson, she held up one finger. He waited. She finished the call, put the phone in her jacket, looked at him. "Corbin just approached me," he said. "I know," she said. "He approached Torres first. Torres told him he didn't have the information Corbin was looking for." "Torres doesn't have the information Corbin is looking for," Jackson said. "I know," she said. "Torres also handled it cleaner than you did if I had to guess." Jackson almost smiled. Didn't quite. "Probably." She looked at him. "How did you handle it?" "I told him I wasn't in a position to discuss it. He implied there might be professional consequences. And I walked away." She nodded, the operational nod. "Good. Was it?" he said. "Because he has more institutional authority in most contexts than me," she said. He stopped. "Jackson," she said. And it was the first time she'd used his first name without the rank or the last name. And it landed differently the way things do when the register changes and you feel the shift. What Corbin does or doesn't have in terms of institutional authority is a question for the people currently reading the documentation from last night. It is not your question. Your question is, did you handle that interaction with integrity? "Yes," he said. "Then you handled it correctly." She moved toward the door. "When you get back to whatever base you're assigned to, you will be contacted within 72 hours by someone who is not Corbin and is not connected to Corbin's chain. You will give them a full account of what you observed at the relay station. Everything you documented, everything I said about the device and the timeline and the traffic, all of it." He absorbed this. "How do I know who to trust when they contact me?" She reached into her jacket and produced a small card. She handed it to him. It had a 12-digit number on it and nothing else. No name, no organization. "Read it," she said. "Don't take it with you." He read it 4 times, handed it back. She put it back in her jacket. "You trust your memory?" she asked. "Yes." "Good." She opened the door. "Get some food. Real debrief in the afternoon, and it's going to run several hours." She went. He stood in the cold storage room and pulled the 12-digit number out of his memory and ran it again and confirmed it was solid, and then put it in a place inside his mind where he kept things that needed to stay. Then he went and found Harris and ate the best scrambled eggs of his life. 10-19 hours. The storm cleared at 10:17. It happened faster than anyone expected, one of those Alaska weather shifts that goes from full assault to complete withdrawal in under 30 minutes, like the mountain had finished making its point and was done. The light that came through after it was the hard, clean light of post-storm morning, and the mountain was different in it. Visible. Present. The kind of visible that makes you understand, looking at it, why the clouds had been covering it. The candidates went outside. Not for any operational reason, just because they could. because they'd spent the last several hours inside a building, being compressed by circumstances, and the open air and the post-storm light felt like something they needed. Cole didn't tell them to go. He didn't tell them not to. He simply wasn't in the corridor when they moved toward the exterior door, which was as much permission as any of them needed. Jackson stood outside the main building and breathed the cold that felt different from last night's cold. Last night it had been a weapon. This morning it was just air. The mountain was visible to the north, the ridge where the contacts had approached, the northeastern junction where the perimeter breach had happened, the general direction of the relay station 14 kilometers away under the new morning light. Okafor came and stood beside him. Then Martinez. Then Brennan, who was quiet in the way he was always quiet, which was the quiet of someone who thought more than they spoke and was usually right when they finally spoke. "What do you think happens to Corbin?" Okafor asked. "I don't know," Jackson said. "You think he was dirty?" Jackson chose his words. "I think the investigation will figure out exactly what Corbin was and wasn't. That's not our call to make." Martinez looked at the mountain. "What happens to us after this rotation? We finish the 3 weeks," Jackson said. And then we go back to our assignments and then we do our jobs." "Different?" Brennan asked. "One word. Brennan economy." Jackson thought about it seriously. "Yes," he said. "Different." "How?" Martinez asked. Jackson looked at the ridge, at the road he'd run with Torres in the dark last night, at the position markers he could now identify precisely because he'd moved through them in the worst possible conditions, and his body remembered every meter. "We know what it feels like now," he said. "The real thing. Not the exercise version, not the training version. The thing where the consequences are actual and the people next to you are what they are and not what you wish they were." He paused. "That doesn't leave you. That changes your internal reference point permanently. Everything you evaluate after this, you evaluate against what happened last night." They stood with that. The mountain held its shape against the clear, cold sky. Reyes came out of this building and joined them, and nobody commented on the fact that he was the last one out and had clearly been somewhere having some kind of private moment before he came. He stood at the edge of the group and looked at the mountain with everyone else. Then he said, "I want to apologize." Nobody said anything. "To all of you," he said, "not just Miller. Yesterday morning I was the loudest voice in a room that needed quiet, and I was the least right person who spoke." He paused. "I also tried to turn Miller against Cross last night, and that was—" "You were doing pattern recognition," Torres said. From the edge of the group where he'd materialize at some point without anyone noticing. Torres had a gift for being somewhere he hadn't been a moment before. Bad data and bad conclusions out. It happens. "It shouldn't have happened in that context," Reyes said. "No," Torres agreed. "But it did, and you caught it, and you corrected it. That's the process." He paused. "The people who never do it wrong aren't learning. They're just lucky." Reyes was quiet for a moment. Then he looked at Jackson. "You good?" "I'm good," Jackson said. And he meant it without reservation. Not the automatic "I'm good" that people say when they're actually processing. Genuinely, specifically accurate to the current moment good. 11:33 hours. Elena and Cole were in the operations room when the candidates came back inside, standing over the main map table, the way they'd stood over it when it was covered in operational material the night before. Now the material was different, administrative, logistical, the paperwork of transitions and handoffs and what comes after. They were talking in low voices that went quiet when the group entered, not secretively, but in the way you stop a private conversation when the room changes. Cole looked at all 6 of them. "You should know that the facility rotation continues as planned. 2 more weeks. The training is genuine, and it will be demanding, and everything you've done in the last 24 hours will inform what comes next." He paused. "The events of last night don't get discussed. Not among yourselves, not with anyone outside this facility, not at any point during or after the rotation, until you are specifically cleared to do so." "Copy," they said, collectively, almost simultaneously. Cole looked at Elena. She looked at the candidates. "One more thing," she said. "Bouillesau." They waited. "This morning in the debrief, I told you that your assumptions are your first enemy." She looked around the group. "I need to add something to that." She paused in the way she paused when the next sentence was the one she actually meant. "Assumptions run both directions. You can assume someone is less than they are. You can also assume they're more than they are and put a weight on them they can't carry. She looked at each of them in turn. Neither serves the people next to you. Jackson thought about Halverson, about the way he'd carried his role in the exercise with a certainty that had eventually become its own kind of blindness. The question is not what you think of the person next to you, Elena said. The question is whether you're paying close enough attention to see who they actually are. She closed the folder in front of her. That's a daily practice, not a one-time achievement. It requires more discipline than any physical training you'll ever do. Reyes said quietly, "How do you know when you're doing it right?" Elena looked at him. For a moment, something in her expression was almost warm. Not quite. Something that lived next to warmth. "When you're surprised less often," she said. "Not never, just less." 13:05 hours. The formal afternoon debrief, as promised, ran long. It covered terrain assessment, defensive position, efficiency, communication, protocol, performance, under stress, decision quality at specific time-stamped moments. Elena ran it with the same clean economy. She ran everything direct, specific, no wasted time. She addressed each candidate by name multiple times. Not always in praise, sometimes in the pointed observation of a decision that could have been better or a moment where better information management would have changed an outcome. Jackson got both. He got a specific commendation for the communications anomaly assessment and for the relay station documentation work. He also got a quiet, precise observation about the 2 seconds he'd spent frozen in the West Corridor at 009 when the interior door came open, 2 seconds that in a different situation might have meant something more expensive than they did last night. "You know what happened in those 2 seconds?" Elena asked him directly. "I tried to figure out what I was looking at before I moved," Jackson said. "Yes. Why?" He thought about it honestly. "Because I wanted to be sure." And sure was the wrong currency in that moment. Speed was the right currency. "Which you have," she said. "You just chose certainty over it." "Yes." "When does certainty matter more than speed?" she asked. The question was to the group now, not just him. Torres answered, "When the action is irreversible." Elena pointed at him once. The only time Jackson saw her use that gesture, the finger point of a teacher who's just heard the correct answer said exactly right. "When the action is irreversible," she repeated, "you can recover from moving too slowly. You cannot recover from moving in the wrong direction permanently." She looked around the group. Know which kind of moment you're in before you decide which currency to spend. The debrief ran another hour after that. When it ended completely. No trailing conversations. No informal extensions. Elena closed her folder and Cole closed his, and the room understood that what had been in session was done. 14:47 hours. Corbin left at 14:47. A helicopter had come in on the first viable window after the storm cleared, and it took Corbin and Halverson and the 2 external operatives who had been part of the exercise's hostile element. They loaded into it with the particular efficiency of people who have been somewhere and are now going somewhere else and are not especially interested in the transition. Before he boarded, Corbin stopped. He turned. He looked at Elena, who was standing 15 meters away near the facility entrance, watching the helicopter load with the same quality of attention she gave everything. He said something. Jackson was far enough away that he couldn't hear the words. He saw Elena's face. He saw her nod once. He saw Corbin turn away and board the helicopter. He walked over to her as the helicopter lifted. "What did he say?" Jackson asked. She watched the helicopter until it cleared the tree line. He said the investigation would take the documentation seriously. "Do you believe him?" She watched the point where the helicopter had been. "I believe the people who receive the documentation will take it seriously. Whether that includes Corbin depends on questions that aren't mine to answer yet." "Does it bother you?" Jackson asked, "not knowing how it resolves?" She looked at him. "I've done the part I can do. The part I can't control is not mine to carry." She paused. "That's not detachment. It's discipline. There's a difference." "What's the difference?" "Detachment is not caring," and she said. "Discipline is caring enough to know where your job ends and someone else's begins." Jackson looked at the point in the sky where the helicopter had gone. "That sounds like something you learned the hard way." "Everything worth knowing sounds like that," she said. She moved back toward the facility entrance. You have a 6-kilometer navigation assessment at 1600. Go eat something. He went. 15:38 hours. He was in the equipment room checking his nav kit when Torres came in and sat on the bench against the wall without preamble. You know what I keep thinking about, Torres said. What? That laugh, Torres said. Yesterday morning. I've been thinking about it too. Not yours, Torres said. The whole room's. Jackson looked up. 6 of us, Torres said, and I was the only one who didn't. I've been trying to figure out why. Was it just that I'm more reserved by temperament? Or did I see something the rest of you didn't? He paused. And honestly, I don't think it was that I saw something. I think I just didn't have the energy to perform the judgment. I was tired from the travel and the cold, and I was focused on settling in, and the laugh just didn't have anywhere to land in me right then. Jackson thought about that. Does it matter why? It matters if the reason is accidental, Torres said. Because if the reason I didn't make the mistake was luck, tiredness, and travel, then I don't actually know how to not make it next time. I just got lucky this time. Jackson put down his nav kit. This was the kind of conversation that deserved his full attention. So what do you do with that? I pay attention to it, Torres said. I don't let myself believe I'm better than the mistake. I stay aware that it's in there. In all of us. He paused. Elena said it, a daily practice. A daily practice, Jackson repeated. They were quiet for a moment. She's leaving after the rotation, Torres said. You know that. I know. She's not going to be here for whatever comes next. The investigation, the fallout from Corbin, the 3 weeks of actual training. He looked at the door. Everything she taught us in 36 hours, that's what we carry. That's all we get. Jackson thought about the rifle case. The way she'd opened it in the operations room with the evening briefing still running in everyone's bodies. The way it had spoken without her saying a word. It's enough, he said. Torres looked at him. It's enough, Jackson said again. More certain the second time. She didn't come here to stay with us. She came here to change what we're made of. He picked up his nav kit. And she did. Torres nodded slowly. Yeah, he said. She did. 1600 hours. The navigation assessment ran 2 hours across terrain that was different after the storm changed footing, shifted drainage, new considerations that hadn't existed in the afternoon exercise 2 days ago. Elena ran it alone, one candidate at a time, the same way she'd run the first assessment. But the questions were different now, and the candidates were different, and the interaction between the two was different. When Jackson's turn came, he ran it the way she'd told him to, not for an audience, not for a grade, for the information. At the third decision point, she asked him, what's the risk on the eastern descent in current conditions? Post-storm consolidation is unpredictable for the next 6 to 8 hours. He said, the eastern descent has a grade that was manageable yesterday. Today, with the new surface layer, it's a variable I'd rather not test unless the alternative routes are all worse. Are they? He checked. Western approach is longer but more stable. Northern is compromised by the same drainage issue as before. He looked at the map. Western. Why, she said. Because stable is worth the extra time when you have extra time, he said. And right now, we have it. She nodded, the operational nod. What if you didn't have extra time? Then I'd run the eastern descent with 3 points of contact on every step, and I'd accept the variable and I'd move fast enough that if the surface failed, I'd be past the worst section before the consequence caught up with me. She looked at him for a moment. That's exactly right, she said. Not well done, not good, exactly right. He felt the difference. One more, she said. You're running the Western approach. Midway through, you get information that changes the situation. Time is now a factor. Do you push on the current route or reassess? Depends on the information, he said. The relay station, she said. Something's happening at the relay station and you need to be there in 40 minutes, not 90. He looked at the map. He looked at the terrain in front of him. He felt the pull between the safe choice and the necessary one. I switched to the eastern descent, he said, even with the variable, because the variable is manageable and the consequence of not being there isn't. She studied him. Something in her expression that wasn't quite visible but was audible in the quality of her attention. How do you know the difference between a manageable variable and an unacceptable one, she asked. He thought about the relay station, the device, the 12-digit number in his memory, the 2 seconds in the west quarter at 009. Experience, he said, which I'm building. And in the meantime, he stopped, looked at her directly. In the meantime, I trust the judgment of people who have more of it than I do without surrendering my own. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, that's the answer. Not the question's answer, something larger. He nodded. She looked at her map. Take the western route. You have time. He went. 18-22 hours. The candidates were at dinner when Cole came in and said without any particular buildup that he had something to say. They looked at him. I've been doing this for 23 years, Cole said. He didn't sit. He stood the way he stood when he was saying something he wanted to be heard standing. I've run more training rotations than I can count. I've worked with candidates who had exceptional records and candidates who were borderline. I've worked with instructors who were technically perfect and instructors who were technically mediocre, but were excellent at turning raw material into finished operators. He paused. I have never in 23 years run a rotation that did what the last 36 hours did. The table was quiet. What you walked into yesterday morning was something most operators don't encounter until they're 3 or 4 years into actual deployment, Cole said. Compounded pressure, uncertain environment, trust compromise, real operational stakes underneath a training surface. He looked at each of them. And you held. Martinez said we held because of Cross. You held because of Cross and because of each other and because of what you individually chose to do when the choice was actually yours to make, Cole said. Give her the credit she deserves and take the credit you deserve. Both things are true. Rhea said, is she going to be debriefed about Corbin, about the investigation? That's above my clearance to know, Cole said. Is she in any danger? Torres asked. Cole looked at Torres with an expression that was complicated. Elena Cross has been in some form of danger for most of her career, he said. That's not me being dramatic. That's the shape of the work she does. He paused. She's also been managing it effectively for longer than most. That's not actually an answer, Torres said. No, Cole said, it's not. He picked up his coffee. Eat, rest. Tomorrow's schedule starts at 0600, and it does not make exceptions for people who sat up all night having feelings about the previous 36 hours. He left. They ate. But what Torres had asked stayed in the air above the table, and nobody addressed it, and everyone was thinking about it. And the food was good, and the coffee was better, and outside the mountain was quiet under the post-storm dark, and somewhere in the facility, in whatever space she'd claimed as her own, Elena Cross was doing exactly what she always did in the hours after a hard thing. The next thing. 1947 hours. Jackson found her in the equipment room. Not intentionally. He'd gone in to check his nav kit one more time before logging it out for the night. The kind of end-of-day habit that had been drilled into him through training and had become genuinely his. She was there before him at the workbench along the far wall, and she was doing something he hadn't seen her do all day. She was cleaning her rifle. Not checking it, cleaning it. The kind of deep, thorough care that takes time and attention and is its own kind of deliberate. She had the components laid out in a specific order on the workbench cloth, and she was moving through them with the focused patience of someone who did this not because it was required, but because it was necessary to her in a way that went past operational. She didn't look up when he came in. He checked his nav kit, logged it out, moved toward the door. Miller, she said. He stopped. Sit down. He sat on the bench along the opposite wall. She kept cleaning. The movements were steady and practiced. The particular sound of the cleaning cloth on metal was quiet and consistent. You're going to be an exceptional operator, she said. He didn't answer immediately, not out of false modesty, out of the understanding that what she just said deserved to be received seriously. Thank you, he said. I'm not saying it to make you feel good, she said. I'm saying it because you need to know the current difference between your potential and your performance, and you need to use that gap productively instead of letting it make you impatient. What's the gap? He asked. Trust, she said. Not of other people, of yourself. She paused. You keep checking your own judgment, your own reads, your own instincts. You verify them against external sources. That's good practice early in a career, but at a certain point you'll need to trust the first read and move before you've finished verifying. She looked up from the rifle, looked at him directly. You weren't built to be second. You were built to be first, and you've spent long enough talking yourself out of that. The room was very quiet. How do you know that? He asked. Navigation exercise. Yesterday afternoon, she said. Two versions of the same route. The first one you ran for me. The second one you ran for yourself. She looked back at the rifle. The second one was better, not because you knew more, because you moved from a different place inside yourself. He sat with that. Will I see you again, he asked, after the rotation. She was quiet for a moment. The cleaning cloth moved in its steady rhythm. Maybe, she said. This work has a way of putting the same people in the same places more than once. She paused. But don't wait for it. Do the work in front of you. He nodded. He stood up. Captain Cross, he said. She looked up. I'm glad you came to this mountain, he said. She looked at him for a long moment. The rifle was still in her hands. The workbench was spread with its careful arrangement. The equipment room was cold and dim and ordinary. Go sleep, she said. 0600 is not a suggestion. He went. He walked back through the facility to the bunk room. He changed out of his gear. He lay down on his cot in the dark. And for the first time since he'd arrived at Raven Peak, Jackson Miller fell asleep within minutes. Not because the questions were answered, not because the situation was resolved, or the investigation was closed, or the future was clear. Because he knew in a way he hadn't known 36 hours ago who he was, and who he was going to become. And that was enough. For now, it was exactly enough. 3 weeks later, Elena Cross left Raven Peak the same way she arrived. Small backpack, old rifle case, no ceremony. Jackson watched her from the operations room window at 0600 on the final morning of the rotation. The helicopter was already on the pad. She walked toward it without looking back at the building, without pausing, without any of the gestures people make when they want the moment to be recorded in someone else's memory. She just walked. The way she'd walked into that room 3 weeks ago, like a person who knew exactly where they were going and had already finished thinking about where they'd been. The helicopter lifted. It crossed the ridge. It disappeared. And Jackson stood at that window for a long moment after it was gone, not because he was waiting for it to come back, but because he was allowing himself the 30 seconds it took to understand that something significant had just ended, and he was going to carry it forward differently than he'd carried anything before. Torres came and stood beside him. Neither of them spoke. That was the right choice. Behind them, the operations room was quiet. The 3 weeks had changed all of them, the terrain assessments, the communication exercises, the low visibility navigation runs, the cold, that never stopped testing whether you were paying attention. But the foundation of it, the thing underneath every lesson and every drill and every quiet correction had been set in those first 36 hours. Everything after was built on that. She never said goodbye, Torres said. No, Jackson said. She just left. Yeah, Torres was quiet for a moment. Somehow that's more her than any goodbye would have been. Jackson nodded. He thought about the equipment room at 1947 on the first night, the rifle parts on the workbench cloth, her voice saying without sentiment and without performance, go sleep. 0600 is not a suggestion. That was the goodbye. He just hadn't recognized it at the time. 6 months later, Jackson Miller stood in front of 22 recruits at a Navy training facility in Virginia and felt briefly and powerfully the disorientation of being on the other side of a thing he'd once been on the first side of. They were 22 young men and women who had made it through the preliminary phases and were now in the first week of the real work. They had the energy of people who had not yet been genuinely tested. Not dismissible energy, not bad energy, just unweathered. The specific brightness of people who were confident because they hadn't yet encountered the thing that would redefine their understanding of what confidence was supposed to mean. He looked at them and recognized himself at noon on the first day at Raven Peak. He recognized the laugh before it happened. One of the recruits, a young man named Decker, 23 years old, physically excellent, technically sound, carrying himself with the particular certainty of someone who had been the best in every room he'd ever walked into, was looking at the instructor standing beside Jackson with an expression that was not quite a smirk, but was building toward one. The instructor beside Jackson was a woman named Captain Reyes. Not his Reyes, a different one. A woman in her late 30s with a quiet competence that Decker had clearly already assessed and clearly already undervalued. Jackson watched Decker's face. He watched the decision form in real time, the quick read, the comfortable conclusion, the assumption dressed up as perception, the exact sequence he knew from the inside. He stepped forward. "Decker," he said. Decker straightened. "Sir, whatever you're thinking right now," Jackson said, "about what you're looking at, about what you've already decided." He let the pause carry its weight. "Put it down." Decker's expression shifted. Confused, not defensive yet. "Sir, I wasn't, you were," Jackson said. Not unkindly, not as punishment, as a simple, accurate fact it was. "I know because I did the exact same thing 18 months ago, in front of someone who was worth 10 of me, and I didn't know it yet." He looked at the whole group now, all 22, and the person I did it in front of didn't correct me in the moment. She just waited. She let the night do it. The room was still. "The night always does it," Jackson said. "The question is whether you waste the time between now and then on a version of yourself that can't serve the people next to you." Decker was completely still. "Eyes on Captain Reyes," Jackson said. "She's going to tell you something about the next 3 weeks, and I need you to hear every word of it like it's the most important thing you'll learn this year." He stepped back. Captain Reyes looked at him for one brief moment with an expression he recognized, not gratitude exactly, not acknowledgement exactly, something more specific than either. The expression of someone who has had the room turned correctly and knows the difference. She began to speak. Jackson listened, and he thought about the 12-digit number he'd carried in his memory for 6 months, about the contact 48 hours after leaving Raven Peak from someone who was not Corbin and was not connected to Corbin's chain, about the account he'd given, complete, accurate, time-stamped, everything documented from the relay station, and everything Elena had said about the device and the traffic and the timeline, about what had come after that. He didn't know all of it. He wasn't cleared for all of it, and he understood why, and accepted the limitation the way Elena had taught him to accept the limits of his own jurisdiction. His part was done. Other people's parts were running. What he did know, because Torres had reached him 3 weeks ago with a message that contained only a date and a case number, and the single word confirmed, was that the investigation had found what it was looking for. That the traffic on the relay station had been traced backward through 7 months of transmissions and had led to something significant enough that 3 people above Corbin's clearance level had spent the subsequent weeks in a process that was not public and not announced, and not the kind of thing that appeared in any official reporting. The right people knew. The work had mattered. And somewhere running the next operation in the next impossible situation, on the next mountain that didn't care about her reputation or her record or her name, Elena Cross had already moved on to whatever came after, carrying nothing that wasn't necessary and everything that was. 2 months after Virginia, Jackson was in a briefing room at a facility he was not going to name, receiving mission parameters for a deployment he was not going to describe, when the officer running the briefing said something that stopped him. Not with the words, with the way the words landed. "This operation has a specific requirement," the officer said. "We need someone who can function in high-ambiguity environments. Someone who makes good decisions with incomplete information and doesn't need external validation to execute." The officer looked at Jackson directly. "Your Raven Peak evaluation is what put you in this room," the officer said. "Specifically the Phase 2 assessment." Jackson absorbed this. "The relay station. The documentation you produced under those conditions is part of what made the larger investigation viable," the officer said. "The people who reviewed it noted that the quality of observation was unusual for a candidate at your stage." "It wasn't just me," Jackson said. "Torres was at the station, and the work was Cross's direction entirely." "I know," the officer said. "She noted that in her own evaluation. She also noted that the independent analytical work you did, the inside source assessment, the Corbin read the decision-making at multiple junctures throughout that night, those were yours." Jackson was quiet. "She wrote something in her evaluation," the officer said. He looked at his folder. "I'm going to read it to you because it's relevant to why you're in this room." He found the page. "She wrote Miller's greatest asset is not his technical skill, which is exceptional, or his physical capability, which is above standard. It is his capacity to hold 2 competing possibilities simultaneously without collapsing to the comfortable one. That is the rarest thing I assess for and the hardest to teach. He arrived at Raven Peak with the instinct and left with the discipline. The combination is worth watching. The room was very quiet. Jackson looked at his hands. He thought about the navigation exercise. The first run and the second run. The first run for the audience and the second run for himself. The second one is better. Not because you knew more, because you moved from a different place inside yourself. She said the combination is worth watching, Jackson said. Yes. Past tense. She tends to write in past tense, the officer said. Suggests she considers the evaluative moment complete when she writes it. He closed the folder. Whether it means she's done watching you is a question I can't answer. Jackson thought about the helicopter lifting over the ridge, about the 30 seconds at the window, about Torres saying somehow that's more her than any goodbye would have been. It doesn't matter, Jackson said. The officer looked at him. Whether she's still watching, Jackson said. It doesn't change what I do. It doesn't change how I work or what I decide or who I am in the room. He looked at the officer. That's the point. The officer studied him for a moment. Then he said, yes, that's exactly the point. He pushed a folder across the table. Mission parameters, he said. You have 48 hours. Jackson picked up the folder. He opened it. He read. And in the space between reading and deciding in the particular internal quiet of a person who has learned the difference between the comfortable conclusion and the accurate one, he heard something. Not a voice, not a memory exactly. Something more like a principle that had been installed in him so completely that it no longer needed a source. It simply operated like breathing, like balance, like the knowledge of which way is north. The loudest person in the room is usually the most afraid. Trust the second run. The variable is manageable. Move. He closed the folder. He looked at the officer. I'm in, he said, 18 months after Raven Peak. Jackson Miller stood at the front of a new room in a new facility before a new group of people who needed something he now knew how to give. He had the mission folder under his arm. He had the evaluation in his memory. He had 3 weeks on a frozen mountain and 1 impossible night and the specific education of a person who had been wrong about something important and had lived long enough to understand exactly why. He thought about what he'd told the recruits in Virginia. The night always does it. He thought about what Torres had said in the bunk room at 0621 in the almost light after the storm. She entered your life to change who you become. He thought about what Elena had said in the equipment room with the rifle parts laid out and the cleaning cloth moving and the coal pressing in from all sides. Do the work in front of you. He looked at the people in front of him. Young, capable, carrying their assumptions like luggage they didn't know was heavy yet, exactly where he'd been. He said, before we start, I'm going to tell you about the coldest night of my life. The room settled. They listened. And somewhere in the world on a mountain, in a briefing room, in the kind of darkness that only exists when someone has chosen to go into it because someone has to, Iron Wolf was already on the next one. Not for recognition, not for the record, because the work was real and the people it protected were real, and she had been built for exactly this and she knew it. And that knowledge was enough and had always been enough and would always be enough. Some people don't enter your life to stay. They enter your life to change the entire direction of who you become. And the best ones never wait around to see it happen. They're already gone, already moving, already on the next mountain.